Let's mark our anniversary with an adventure, I suggested to my hardworking husband. He deserved a break, and I was eager to indulge us both. For our first anniversary, I spared no expense, booking us a lavish room in a celebrity-frequented luxury hotel. It was a gesture aimed solely at bringing joy to my husband's heart, yet little did I know it would set the stage for everything that followed. Let's rewind a year back. At 28, I found myself married to Logan at 26 without the traditional dating preamble. Ours was what you might call a zero-day marriage. We crossed paths on a dating app, a decision I made impulsively one tipsy evening. Initially skeptical of the digital dating world, I found myself drawn in by its tales of the unknown, fueled by lingering drinks and curiosity. Amidst a sea of conversations that often fizzled out, Logan stood out. After a month of daily exchanges, we agreed to meet, and from the moment we did, it felt like reconnecting with an old friend. On our first meeting, Logan proposed the idea of dating with marriage in mind, and despite my reservations, I went along with it. It was swift, perhaps too swift, but there was an undeniable pull between us. Before long, we were arranging family meetings, caught up in the whirlwind of our budding relationship. Looking back, I see now the signs I missed, the subtle cues that hinted at what was to come. As we gathered for the family meeting at Logan's home, his excitement was palpable. "Mom, I've brought home my future wife," he announced proudly. Though I felt a twinge of self-consciousness, his mother Grace and sister Lily matched his enthusiasm, setting the stage for the next chapter of our story. As we exchanged pleasantries, Grace warmly greeted me, dispelling any formality. "Let's drop the formalities," she said with a smile. "We're becoming family after all." Her words filled me with warmth, reassured by the prospect of joining such a welcoming family. The tension dissolved instantly, replaced by a sense of familiarity that made it seem as though we'd known each other for years. Just as I was basking in the newfound ease, Lily posed an unexpected question. "So, how much do you make a year?" she inquired, her curiosity bordering on intrusive. Logan swiftly intervened, offering an explanation. "I've just started a new job, so it's entry level for me. Cho's been a nurse for 8 years, so she earns about twice as much," he explained, a hint of pride in his voice. Grace's response caught me off guard. "Wow, you're rich. What a fortunate marriage," she exclaimed, patting Logan's shoulder approvingly. Although his modesty belied the situation, I couldn't shake the unease that crept in. The absence of Logan's father for the past 5 years meant they relied on Lily's part-time cleaning job and Grace's pension. Logan contributed from his meager earnings, a fact that seemed to escape the conversation. Then came the question of our living arrangements. "Where will you live?" Grace inquired, her curiosity tinged with expectation. "We have a condo," I replied, admitting I'd bought it last year, never anticipating marriage. Lily's response veered towards surprise and a hint of envy. "You own a condo. Must be nice," she remarked, a subtle suggestion of newfound wealth. I hastened to clarify, emphasizing that I financed it myself and that the mortgage wasn't significantly different from renting. Grace's tone shifted, expressing reliance and a hint of expectation. "We'll be counting on you from now on," she stated, alluding to potential future assistance. The notion of sharing as a family left me unsettled, but I chose to defer the discomfort for another time. With gratitude and a promise to seek guidance, I excused myself, eager to leave the spotlight. Our aversion to being the center of attention led us to forego a grand wedding ceremony, opting instead for a simple paperwork filing, a decision influenced by my demanding job. I rarely wore rings, so opting for a modest one seemed sufficient. There was no grand proposal with an engagement ring, but I accepted that this was the reality of our situation. After tying the knot, we both remained diligent in our work. Taking charge of our finances, I started stashing away funds, gradually building a safety net for our future. However, after 6 months of marriage, I stumbled upon a concerning discovery. $2,000 had vanished from our account. The only plausible culprit was Logan. Confronting him that evening, I questioned the disappearance. "Did you know $2,000 was withdrawn from our bank account?" I demanded, urging him to contact the bank. Initially taken aback, Logan swiftly adopted a defensive stance, brushing off the issue as a mere loan to his mother. Infuriated by his nonchalant attitude, I pressed him further, emphasizing the importance of communication in financial matters. His dismissive response only fueled my frustration, with a sinking suspicion fueled by a previous encounter where his mother boasted of a casino win. I realized the money likely fueled her gambling habits. Up until then, our savings were pooled, but following this incident, I resolved to squirrel away extra funds separately. Despite this rift, I assumed Logan's demeanor would remain unchanged as long as family matters didn't surface. He was diligently employed, after all. However, our first wedding anniversary prompted a desire to deviate from our usual frugality and indulge in a bit of extravagance. Excitement bubbled within me as I arrived home, eager to unveil a surprise trip to Logan. However, my anticipation was dampened by the presence of Lily, who had been making frequent appearances lately, a routine that was starting to wear on me. Returning home after a taxing day of work to find her there was becoming a source of stress. In hindsight, the timing couldn't have been worse for sharing the news of our planned getaway. Yet I couldn't contain my enthusiasm about the luxury hotel reservation I had painstakingly secured. Logan's eyes sparkled with delight at the mention of the trip, but it was Lily who reacted most fervently. "Is it that hotel from the TV ads?" she exclaimed incredulously. Her tone carried a hint of envy, which I met with a confident explanation. "Since we've never taken a trip alone, we decided to indulge this time," I asserted, recounting the nerve-wracking experience of securing the booking on the day slots opened. Lily's response dripped with resentment. "How unfair of you," she retorted, her words tinged with bitterness. "Just because you're a nurse doesn't mean you should hog all the travel opportunities." She appealed to a sense of familial obligation, urging us to relinquish the trip in an act of filial piety. However, I couldn't overlook her penchant for travel despite her claims of financial strain, nor her propensity for fare evasion, a behavior she boasted about shamelessly. Her thinly veiled attempts at manipulation left me resolute in my decision. "Absolutely not," I declared firmly, determined to stand my ground. "We've been saving for this trip, and Logan works tirelessly. We deserve this splurge." Lily's displeasure morphed into a pointed remark directed at Logan, casting aspersions on my character and our marriage. Despite the discord, I remained steadfast in my resolve. There was no way I would forfeit our long-awaited trip to appease Lily's sense of entitlement. I felt a surge of anger as Logan remained silent, his gaze fixed downward. His inability to defend me only fueled my frustration. As Lily departed, her muttered remark casting me as the villain, Logan's puzzled expression mirrored my own disappointment. The excitement surrounding our trip dissipated, replaced by an uncomfortable tension that lingered as we retired for the night in an awkward silence. Normally, a good night's sleep would ease my troubles, but the following day brought an unexpected turn of events. Logan's words struck me like a blow when he suggested going on the trip with his mother and sister instead, excluding me entirely. I was taken aback, vehemently opposed to the idea. I couldn't shake the suspicion that his sudden change of heart stemmed from the late-night texts flooding his phone, likely filled with manipulative words from his family. His accusation of my heartlessness only deepened the divide between us. Marriage, he argued, was about uniting families, not individual desires. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling of being unfairly targeted. Despite our attempts to reason with each other, the conversation devolved into a stalemate, leaving us at an impasse. The disappointment was palpable as what was meant to be a joyous occasion now soared into a source of conflict. Returning home the next day to a tense atmosphere, I found my mother-in-law and sister-in-law waiting for me. With a smug expression, my mother-in-law declared, "Welcome back. We've resolved the trip matter. It's settled. The trip will be for me, my daughter, and my son." Shocked into silence, I turned to Logan for an explanation, though deep down, I doubted any justification could appease my frustration. Logan's response only fueled my disbelief. "It's as my mom said," he explained. "I shared our recent issues with her, and she proposed this solution. I'm going, you're staying. That's final." Outraged by the lack of consideration, I finally lost my temper, demanding an explanation for their irrational decision. But Logan's reply was laced with venomous words, his anger boiling over. He belittled my profession and reduced me to a mere source of income, revealing a side of him I had never seen before. His psychological abuse cut deep, leaving me feeling foolish for the efforts I had invested in our relationship thus far. Witnessing the altercation, my sister-in-law interjected, urging us to make amends and join them on the trip. But the thought of acquiescing to their unreasonable demands was too much to bear. I couldn't tolerate Logan's dependency on his mother and sister any longer. I've reached a point where I realize I don't need to hold on to affection for Logan or his family anymore. My once warm feelings have cooled to the point where it feels like I've been living in a dream. The idea of going on a trip with someone I've grown to dislike so intensely is unbearable. If his family holds such significance for him, then perhaps it's time to end our relationship. Let's proceed with the divorce, just as I suggested. It seems like the only logical solution to this impasse. Logan agrees, albeit with a hint of relief, suggesting we discuss it further after the trip. For now, he insists, the trip must take precedence. Feeling defeated, I reluctantly concede, allowing his family to have their way. When I inform Logan of my decision, he's quick to express his gratitude, assuring me he'll buy me a souvenir and even suggesting I might want some time alone to relax. His cheerful demeanor grates on me, but I've resolved to see this through. Taking matters into my own hands, I arranged for the hotel reservation to be changed to Logan's name and adjusted to accommodate a party of 3. On the day of their departure, I take the day off to see them off, observing their excitement with a mixture of resignation and amusement. Their overly packed suitcases for a one-night trip draw a chuckle from me as they set off. With them gone, I'm left with a newfound sense of purpose. Over the next 2 days, I embark on a life-changing task, relocating all of Logan's belongings to a rented storage unit. As a minimalist, I don't have much to pack up, but the process keeps me busy and focused on the fresh start that lies ahead. With the help of a friend from work, we swiftly complete the task in less than 2 hours. Now, there's no reason for Logan to return. This condo, purchased in my name when I was single, will remain a sanctuary from him. The locksmith I've arranged arrives promptly, ensuring that Logan is permanently barred from entering the premises. Additionally, I've sought legal advice from a lawyer named Mason regarding the divorce proceedings. Armed with audio evidence of the psychological abuse I endured, Mason assures me of a guaranteed victory and offers to represent me. Relieved to have someone else handle the divorce talks, I focus on tying up loose ends. Meanwhile, Logan and his family are under the mistaken impression that the hotel stay is prepaid, unaware that I had only made reservations. As a gesture for our anniversary, I had even arranged for a fancy cake and champagne, intending to surprise him. However, all expenses were to be settled at checkout. As anticipated, my phone buzzes incessantly around checkout time, but I ignore the calls with a sense of satisfaction. I can only imagine their shock when confronted with the hefty bill at the hotel. True to my expectations, I end up in police custody, unable to pay. Washing my hands of the situation, I send the divorce papers and the key to the storage unit containing Logan's belongings to his family home. With Logan and his family out of the picture, my condo returns to its peaceful state. I had prepared for the inevitable contestation of the divorce, with Mason handling everything on my behalf. Despite their financial struggles, Logan's family manages to scrape together enough money to secure their release. However, upon their return, their aggression leads to police intervention. Given the ongoing divorce mediation due to Logan's psychological abuse, he is slapped with a restraining order. Unable to afford a legal battle, his family quickly agrees to the divorce, bringing closure to the tumultuous chapter of my life. In the divorce proceedings, I assert my right to compensation for the psychological abuse endured during our marriage. Surprisingly, becoming single again proves to be less daunting than anticipated. Meanwhile, it appears that Logan's family continues to rely on his income, likely exacerbated by his gambling habits that he couldn't seem to shake. Logan's own employment instability becomes evident as he struggles to hold down a job, often calling in sick or even quitting impulsively. Despite my concerns about his behavior, he dismisses them, citing mental health issues. However, his inability to maintain steady employment leads to financial strain for his family. His sister's unemployment adds to their financial woes, and their refusal of welfare assistance only compounds their debt. To make matters worse, I've noticed suspicious characters lurking around their home, adding a sense of unease to their already turbulent situation. In contrast, my life post-divorce is remarkably stress-free. Flourishing in my career, I've even been promoted to supervisor, a role that I relish despite its challenges. With only myself to care for, I find I can cut corners on household chores, allowing me more time to focus on my own well-being. Though I hadn't planned on dating for a while, I found companionship with Caleb, a doctor who had been a supportive confidant before my marriage. Unlike my ex-husband, Caleb is both financially and emotionally stable. Still, I approach the idea of marriage cautiously now, mindful of the lessons learned from my past. Reflecting on my journey, I can't help but feel a sense of gratitude for the unexpected turn of events. In hindsight, I'm thankful that they took that ill-fated trip, unwittingly freeing me from a toxic situation.
The moment the words left Dad's mouth, a tidal wave of shock hit me. "Just so you know, I decided today's the day. I'm selling the house." He said it so casually, like he was commenting on the weather, not dropping a bombshell that would shatter our lives. I stared at him, my fork frozen halfway to my mouth. Beside me, my sister Arden gasped, her eyes wide. "What? Why?" Dad shrugged, sipping his coffee. "It's time. This old place is too big for just the three of us. Besides, the money from the sale will fund our travel plans, Arden. Remember those dreams we talked about?" Arden's face lit up, a grin spreading across her features. But I couldn't share her enthusiasm. All I could think about was how this decision would ruin everything I'd been working towards. "You can't do this," I said, my voice tight. "This is our home, Dad. It's been in the family for generations." He leveled a look at me. "Verity, I know change is hard, but it's my decision to make." Anger flared in my chest. Of course, Arden was on board with this harebrained scheme. She was always the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in Dad's eyes. Meanwhile, I was the one who'd been holding everything together since Mom died, managing the family businesses, making sure the bills got paid. And this was the thanks I got? I pushed back my chair, the legs screeching against the hardwood floor. "I have to go. I have a meeting." Dad frowned. "On a Saturday?" "Some of us have responsibilities," I snapped. I couldn't stand to be in the same room with them, couldn't bear to see the excitement on Arden's face. I grabbed my purse and stormed out, slamming the front door behind me. As I walked to my car, my mind raced. I'd been counting on my inheritance, on the security of knowing the estate would always be there. Now, with a few careless words, Dad had ripped that away. I climbed into my car, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I couldn't let this happen. I wouldn't. Dad had no idea how much I needed that money. The divorce had left me with nothing, and my ex, Calvin, was still bitter about the settlement. He'd do anything to hurt me, to hurt my family. As I pulled out of the driveway, a plan began to form in my mind. Dad wanted to sell the house? Fine. But I'd make sure the money ended up where it belonged, with me. I'd forge the documents, redirect the funds. He'd never even know what hit him. A grim smile tugged at my lips. Arden might be Dad's favorite, but I was the smart one, the resourceful one, and I'd do whatever it took to protect what was mine, even if it meant betraying the only family I had left. Over the next few weeks, the tension in the house was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Every time Arden brought up the sale or her travel plans, I had to bite my tongue to keep from screaming. How could she be so selfish? Didn't she understand what this meant for me? I tried to reason with Dad, to make him see how unfair this was. "I've been the one holding everything together," I argued. "I deserve a say in what happens to the estate." But he just shook his head. "Verity, I've made up my mind. The house is going on the market, and that's final." I could feel my control slipping. One evening, I cornered Arden in the kitchen. "Why do you get to dictate our lives just because you're the baby of the family?" I hissed. She blinked at me, confusion written all over her face. "What are you talking about? This isn't about me, Verity. It's about what Dad wants." "What Dad wants," I mimicked, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "You mean what you want. You've always been his favorite, and now you're manipulating him into giving you everything." Arden's eyes narrowed. "That's not true, and you know it. Stop being so dramatic." I laughed, the sound harsh and bitter. "Dramatic? I'll show you dramatic." I stormed out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to do something, had to take back control. That's when I started putting my plan into action. It was almost too easy to forge Dad's signature on the financial documents, to set up a new account in my name, and start siphoning off funds. He was so trusting, so naive, he never even checked the statements. But Arden, with her suspicious nature, started noticing things. The way I could suddenly afford new clothes, expensive dinners out. She'd give me these sidelong glances, her brow furrowed like she was trying to piece together a puzzle. One day she confronted me. "Where are you getting all this money, Verity? You haven't worked in months." I shrugged, keeping my expression neutral. "I have my ways. Don't worry about it." She crossed her arms. Is that why you've been so against selling the house? Because you're stealing from Dad? I flinched. She was getting too close to the truth. You don't know what you're talking about. I'm not stealing anything. Arden shook her head. I don't believe you, and I'm going to find out what you're up to. Panic clawed at my throat. I couldn't let her ruin everything, not when I was so close. I had to find a way to stop her, to throw her off the scent. That's when I thought of Calvin, my dear, vengeful ex-husband. He hated my family almost as much as he hated me. If anyone could help me take Arden down, it was him. I picked up the phone, my fingers trembling as I dialed his number. Calvin, I said when he answered. I need your help. It's time to make my sister pay for everything she's done. I could practically hear his smirk through the line. I thought you'd never ask. What did you have in mind? As I outlined my scheme, I felt a thrill of anticipation. Arden thought she could outsmart me, but she had no idea who she was dealing with. I would make her regret ever crossing me. And when the dust settled, I'd be the one left standing with everything I'd ever wanted. The house, the money, the power. It was all within my grasp, and I'd burn down the whole world to get it. With Calvin on board, my plan kicked into high gear. We met up at a seedy bar on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where no one would recognize us. Over cheap whiskey, we hammered out the details. You're sure you can pull this off? Calvin asked, his eyes glinting with malice. Forging documents is one thing, but embezzling from your own father? That's a whole new level of messed up. I tossed back my drink, relishing the burn in my throat. I'm not just going to pull it off. I'm going to make it look like Arden's the one behind it all. Calvin let out a low whistle. You really hate your sister, don't you? I smiled, but there was no humor in it. You have no idea. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into the scheme. I spent hours hunched over my laptop, manipulating bank statements and transferring funds. It was almost too easy. Dad's accounts were linked to the estate, and with the impending sale, no one was paying close attention to the money coming in and going out. But as the numbers in my own account grew, so did Arden's suspicions. She started watching me like a hawk. Her eyes narrowed every time I stepped out for a meeting or came home with a new purchase. One evening, she cornered me in the living room. I know what you're doing, Verity, she said, her voice low and accusing. You're stealing from Dad, aren't you? I scoffed, trying to play it off. Don't be ridiculous. I'm just managing some investments for the estate. It's all above board. Arden wasn't buying it. Then why are you being so secretive? Why won't you let me see the statements? I felt a flare of anger. She had no right to question me, to stick her nose where it didn't belong. Because it's none of your business, Arden. I'm the one who's been taking care of everything while you've been off chasing your silly little dreams. Her face flushed with indignation. Those silly little dreams are what's going to give Dad a better life. But you don't care about that, do you? All you care about is yourself. I stepped closer, my voice dropping to a hiss. You think you're so perfect, don't you? The golden child who can do no wrong. Well, guess what? I'm done living in your shadow. I'm taking what's mine, and there's nothing you can do to stop me. Arden's eyes widened, and for a moment I saw a flicker of fear. Good. Let her be afraid. Let her see what I was capable of. She backed away, her hands raised in surrender. I don't know what's gotten into you, Verity, but this isn't over. I'm going to find out the truth, and when I do, you'll be sorry. I watched her go, my heart pounding with a mixture of triumph and terror. She was getting too close, but I couldn't stop now. I was in too deep. That night, I met up with Calvin again. We need to speed things up, I told him. Arden's onto us. He frowned. What do you want to do? I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to say. We need to set her up, make it look like she's the one who's been embezzling, plant evidence, frame her somehow. Calvin's eyes widened. That's risky, Verity. If we get caught... We won't, I snapped. I've come too far to let Arden ruin everything. We'll make it work. He sighed, but I could see the gleam of excitement in his eyes. He was just as twisted as I was, just as hungry for revenge. All right, he said. Let's do it. Let's take the little princess down. Dad's birthday was supposed to be a celebration, a chance for the family to come together and forget about the tension of the past few weeks. But as I watched Arden move around the room, her eyes constantly darting in my direction, I knew there would be no peace today. We were gathered in the living room, a small pile of presents on the coffee table. Dad was in his armchair, a smile on his face as he sipped his morning coffee. Arden perched on the edge of the couch, her body rigid with barely suppressed anger. I tried to act normal, forcing a smile as I handed Dad his gift. "Happy birthday, old man. This one's from me." He tore off the wrapping paper, revealing a sleek new watch. "Wow, Verity, this is too much. You shouldn't have." I shrugged. "Only the best for you, Dad." Arden made a small sound of disbelief, and I shot her a warning glare. She'd been snooping around my room earlier, and I'd caught her going through my desk. She was getting too close to the truth, and I needed to shut her down before she ruined everything. As Dad admired his new watch, Arden stood up abruptly. "Can I talk to you in private, Verity?" I hesitated, but there was no way to avoid it without looking suspicious. "Sure, let's go in the kitchen." She led the way, her steps quick and purposeful. As soon as we were out of earshot, she whirled on me. "I found the documents, Verity. The forged signatures, the fake accounts. You've been stealing from Dad, haven't you?" My heart skipped a beat, but I kept my face carefully blank. "I don't know what you're talking about, Arden. You're being paranoid." She laughed, the sound harsh and disbelieving. "Don't play dumb with me. I saw the transfers, the missing money. You think you've caught me in some kind of game, Verity? These are serious accusations." I stepped closer, my voice low and threatening. "You're right, they are serious accusations. Accusations that could ruin our family, tear us apart. Is that what you want?" Arden's eyes narrowed. "What I want is the truth. I want you to admit what you've done and face the consequences." I shook my head. "I haven't done anything wrong, Arden. And even if I had, do you really think Dad would believe you? He trusts me, relies on me. You're just the flighty little sister who's never had to worry about anything." Her face flushed with anger. "That's not true. I care about this family just as much as you do." "Then prove it," I hissed. "Keep your mouth shut and let me handle things. Don't go running to Dad with wild accusations." For a moment I thought she might argue, but then her shoulders slumped, and I saw the defeat in her eyes. "Fine, but this isn't over, Verity. I'm going to find a way to stop you." I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Good luck with that, sis. You'll need it." We rejoined Dad in the living room, putting on a show of normality. But inside, my mind was racing. Arden was getting too close, and I needed to act fast. As soon as the birthday festivities were over, I called Calvin. "We need to move up the timeline," I told him. "Arden found the documents, and she's threatening to go to Dad." He swore under his breath. "I told you this was risky, Verity. What do you want to do?" I closed my eyes, steeling myself for what I knew had to be done. "We have to frame her. Make it look like she's the one who's been stealing. It's the only way to save ourselves." Calvin was silent for a moment. Then, "All right, I'll handle it. Just be ready to play your part when the time comes." I hung up, my hands shaking. I was crossing a line, one I could never come back from, but it was the only way to protect what was mine, and I would do anything to keep it that way. The fallout from Arden's discovery was swift and brutal. Dad, always the peacemaker, tried to smooth things over, but it was clear that the cracks in our family were turning into chasms. In a last-ditch effort to uncover the truth, he hired a private investigator. I knew it was only a matter of time before the truth came out, before my carefully constructed web of lies unraveled. I was in my room, pacing back and forth like a caged animal, when I heard a knock at the door. I opened it to find Calvin standing there, a grim look on his face. "We have a problem," he said, pushing past me into the room. "The PI found the money trail. He knows about the embezzlement." I felt a rush of fear, but I pushed it down. "What about Arden? Did he find anything on her?" Calvin shook his head. "No, but that's not the worst part. He also found out about our connection. He knows we've been working together." I swore under my breath. This was bad. If Dad found out about my alliance with Calvin, he'd never forgive me. He'd always hated my ex-husband, thought he was a bad influence. "What are we going to do?" I asked, my voice shaking. Calvin's eyes glinted with a familiar ruthlessness. "We stick to the plan. We frame Arden, make it look like she's the mastermind behind it all. It's the only way to save ourselves." I hesitated. Framing Arden was one thing, but doing it with Calvin by my side, it felt wrong, like a betrayal of the worst kind. But then I thought about everything I stood to lose. The money, the power, the security. I couldn't let it all slip away, not after everything I'd done to get it. Okay, I said finally. We'll do it your way. But we have to be careful. If anyone finds out the truth. Calvin grabbed my shoulders, his grip almost painful. They won't. We're too smart for that. We'll make them all pay for underestimating us. There was a knock at the door, and we sprang apart. I smoothed my hair, trying to look calm as I opened it. It was Dad, his face grave. Verity, we need to talk. The investigator found something. My heart hammered in my chest, but I forced a smile. Of course, Dad. Let's go downstairs. As we walked into the living room, I saw Arden sitting on the couch, her face pale and drawn. The investigator stood by the window, a file folder in his hands. What's going on? I asked, trying to sound innocent. Dad sighed. The investigator found evidence of embezzlement, Verity. Large sums of money transferred out of the estate accounts. I feigned shock. What? That's impossible. Who would do something like that? The investigator cleared his throat. The transfers were made using your sister's login credentials. It appears that Arden has been stealing from the family. Arden leapt to her feet, her eyes blazing. That's a lie! I would never do that! Dad held up a hand. The evidence is clear, Arden. I didn't want to believe it, but I can't ignore the facts. I watched as Arden crumbled, tears streaming down her face. A part of me felt a twisted sense of satisfaction, seeing her brought low. But another part, buried deep, felt a pang of guilt. Dad turned to me, his eyes searching. Did you know about this, Verity? Is that why you've been so resistant to selling the house? I shook my head. No, Dad. I had no idea. I'm just as shocked as you are. It was a lie, but it rolled off my tongue with ease. I'd gotten good at lying, at manipulating the truth to suit my needs. As Arden sobbed and Dad comforted her, I caught Calvin's eye across the room. He gave me a small nod, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. We'd done it. We'd won. But as I stood there, watching my family fall apart, I couldn't help but wonder at what cost. The revelation of Arden's supposed betrayal sent shockwaves through the family. Dad was beside himself, torn between anger and disbelief. Arden, for her part, couldn't stop crying, insisting over and over that she was innocent. As for me, I played the role of the shocked and devastated sister to perfection. Inside, though, I was a mess of conflicting emotions. Triumph, guilt, fear, they all swirled together in a sickening cocktail. A few days later, Dad called a family meeting. He said we needed to discuss the situation, to decide how to move forward. I knew it was just an excuse to confront Arden, to make her face the consequences of her actions. We gathered in the living room, the same room where we'd celebrated so many birthdays and holidays. But there was no joy in the air now, only a suffocating tension. Dad sat in his armchair, his face grave. Arden perched on the edge of the couch, her eyes red and puffy. I took a seat across from her, trying to look as neutral as possible. How could you do this to your own father, your sister? Dad asked, his voice thick with emotion. How could you betray us like this? Arden shook her head, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. I didn't, Dad. I swear to you, I didn't do anything wrong. Dad slammed his hand down on the arm of the chair, making us both jump. Don't lie to me, Arden. The evidence is clear. You stole from me, from this family. I watched as Arden crumpled under the weight of his anger. She looked so small, so broken. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. But then I remembered everything she had, everything I'd never been given. The love, the attention, the adoration. She'd had it all, and she'd squandered it. She deserved this. I'm sorry, Dad, I said, my voice trembling with fake emotion. I should have seen the signs. I should have stopped her. Dad turned to me, his eyes softening. It's not your fault. Verity. Arden made her choices. She has to face the consequences. Arden let out a choked sob. Please, Dad, you have to believe me. I didn't do this. Someone is setting me up. I scoffed. Who would want to set you up, Arden? Who would go to all that trouble? She looked at me then, really looked at me. And in that moment, I saw a flicker of understanding in her eyes. She knew I was behind it all, but it was too late. Dad was already convinced of her guilt, already planning his next moves. I'm sorry, Arden, but I can't let this go, he said, his voice heavy with regret. I'm going to have to involve the authorities. You need help, and you need to face the legal repercussions of your actions. Arden buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs. I watched her, feeling a twisted sense of satisfaction. I'd won. I'd finally beaten her at her own game. But as I sat there, basking in my victory, I couldn't shake the nagging sense of unease. The way Arden had looked at me, the accusation in her eyes, she knew the truth, and she wouldn't rest until she'd exposed me. I'd have to be careful, have to cover my tracks even more carefully than before. I couldn't let her ruin everything, not when I was so close to getting what I wanted. As Dad comforted Arden, murmuring empty promises of support and forgiveness, I slipped out of the room. I had work to do, plans to make. The game wasn't over yet, and I was determined to come out on top, no matter what it took. The final nail in Arden's coffin came a week later, at a family dinner that will forever be etched in my memory. Dad had invited the private investigator to join us, saying he had new information to share. I was on edge, my nerves frayed to the breaking point. I'd been working with Calvin to cover our tracks, to make sure nothing could be traced back to us, but the paranoia was eating me alive, making me jump at every shadow. We sat around the dining room table, picking at our food in tense silence. Arden was barely holding it together, her face pale and drawn. Dad just looked tired, like the weight of the world was on his shoulders. Finally, the investigator cleared his throat. "I've uncovered new evidence in the case," he said, his voice grave. "It appears that Arden was not acting alone in her embezzlement scheme." My heart stopped. For a moment, I was sure he was talking about me, that somehow he'd discovered my involvement. But then he slid a folder across the table, and I saw the name on the cover. Calvin Mitchell. Dad's face went white. Calvin? Verity's ex-husband? What does he have to do with this? The investigator opened the folder, revealing a stack of documents. It appears that Calvin and Arden have been working together for months, siphoning money out of the estate accounts. We've found evidence of their communication, their plans to frame Verity for the theft. I sat there, stunned. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Calvin had betrayed me, had been working with Arden all along. Arden was crying now, big, heaving sobs that shook her whole body. "It's not true," she wailed. "I didn't do anything wrong. Calvin is lying." Dad shook his head, his face a mask of disappointment. "I don't know what to believe anymore, Arden. The evidence is overwhelming." He turned to the investigator. "What happens now? Will they face charges?" The investigator nodded. "I've already turned everything over to the authorities. They'll be issuing arrest warrants for both Arden and Calvin." I felt a rush of relief, followed quickly by a pang of guilt. I'd wanted to take Arden down, but not like this. Not with Calvin's betrayal. Dad turned to me, his eyes searching. "Did you know about this, Verity? Did you have any idea what they were planning?" I shook my head, the lie bitter on my tongue. "No, Dad. I had no idea. I'm just as shocked as you are." He sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "I just don't understand how it got this far, how I could have been so blind." I reached out, taking his hand in mine. "It's not your fault, Dad. They fooled us all." But even as I said the words, I knew they weren't true. I was the biggest fool of all, thinking I could trust Calvin, thinking I could outsmart everyone. As the reality of the situation sank in, I felt a rising panic. What if Calvin turned on me, tried to implicate me in the scheme? What if Arden found a way to prove her innocence? I excused myself from the table, mumbling something about needing air. I stumbled outside, my breath coming in sharp gasps. I had to do something, had to find a way to protect myself. But as I stood there, staring out into the gathering darkness, I realized the truth. There was no way out. No escape from the tangled web I'd woven. I'd destroyed my family, my life, all in the pursuit of money and power. And now I would have to face the consequences, just like Arden and Calvin, just like the monster I'd become. I sank to my knees, a sob tearing from my throat. I'd won, but at what cost? What was left for me now, in the ruins of everything I'd once held dear? I didn't know. And for the first time in my life, I was truly, utterly lost. The aftermath of the dinner was a blur. Arden and Calvin were arrested, charged with fraud and embezzlement. The courts moved quickly, eager to make an example of them. I watched from the sidelines, numb to the chaos around me. I should have been happy, should have been celebrating my victory. But all I felt was a hollow ache in my chest, a sense of loss so profound it took my breath away. Dad was a wreck, barely able to function. He couldn't understand how his own daughter could have betrayed him so deeply. He turned to me for support, leaning on me in a way he never had before. I played the role of the dutiful daughter, the rock in the storm. but inside I was screaming, suffocating under the weight of my own guilt. The day of the trial arrived, and I forced myself to go, to sit in the courtroom and watch as Arden and Calvin's fate was decided. They both looked so small, so broken. Even Calvin, with his arrogant smirk, seemed diminished somehow. The evidence was damning, the case clear-cut. The jury deliberated for less than an hour before returning with their verdict. Guilty, on all counts. I watched as Arden crumpled, her sobs echoing through the courtroom. Calvin just sat there, staring straight ahead, his jaw clenched. The judge was merciless, handing down the maximum sentence for both of them. 20 years in prison, no chance of parole. As the bailiff led them away, Arden turned to look at me, her eyes blazing with hatred. "You did this," she hissed. "You set me up. I know it was you." I just stared at her, my face a mask of indifference, but inside I was reeling, her words hitting me like a physical blow. She knew. She had always known, and now she would spend the rest of her life paying for my sins. I left the courtroom in a daze, my mind spinning. I had won, but at what cost? My family was in shambles, my sister's life ruined, and for what? Money? Power? It all seemed so meaningless now. Dad found me outside, his face lined with grief. "I never thought I'd see the day," he said, his voice hoarse. "My own child, a criminal." I swallowed hard, trying to find the words. "I'm so sorry, Dad. I can't imagine how hard this must be for you." He looked at me, his eyes searching. "You're all I have left now, Verity. Promise me you'll never do anything like this. Promise me you'll be better than they were." I nodded, my throat tight. "I promise, Dad. I'll make you proud." But even as I said the words, I knew they were a lie. I was no better than Arden or Calvin. I was worse, because I had manipulated them all, had destroyed everything in my path. And now, I would have to live with that knowledge for the rest of my life. The months passed, and life went on. Dad and I tried to pick up the pieces, to rebuild what we could. But the wounds were deep, the scars permanent. I threw myself into my work, into managing the estate. I told myself it was for Dad, to make things easier for him. But the truth was, I needed the distraction, needed something to keep the guilt at bay. One evening, as we sat together in the living room, Dad turned to me, his face somber. "It's time we look forward, Arden. Let's make new memories, just us, truly free of the past." I nodded, trying to smile, but inside I knew the truth. I would never be free of the past, never be able to escape the choices I had made. I had won, but I had lost everything that mattered. And now, I would have to live with that bitter truth every day for the rest of my life. It was the price of my ambition, the cost of my revenge, and it was a price I would pay, forever and always. I never thought I'd find myself in this position, married with a beautiful daughter and another child on the way. Growing up in a small town, I had always dreamed of a better life, one where I could make a difference and provide for my family in ways my parents never could. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect it. My husband, Ethan, and I had been happily married for 5 years. He was a successful software engineer, and I was a dedicated nurse. Our daughter, Lily, was the light of our lives. She had just turned 4 and was the spitting image of her father, with his warm brown eyes and infectious smile. Everything seemed perfect until the day we received the devastating news that Ethan's father had passed away suddenly. He had been a kind and supportive figure in my life, always treating me like a daughter. His loss left a gaping hole in our family, as we struggled to come to terms with our grief. Ethan's mother, Mona, suggested moving in with us to help with the household and my second pregnancy. At first I was hesitant. Mona and I had never seen eye to eye, but Ethan convinced me that having her around would be beneficial, especially with his frequent work trips. Little did I know that her presence would turn my life upside down. From the moment she moved in, Mona made it clear that she was in charge. She criticized my every move, from the way I cooked to how I raised Lily. "You're too soft on her," she would say, her voice dripping with condescension. "She needs discipline, or she'll end up just like you." I tried my best to brush off her comments, focusing on my work and taking care of Lily. But as my pregnancy progressed, I found myself increasingly exhausted and overwhelmed. Ethan was rarely home, and when he was too preoccupied with work to notice the tension between his mother and me. One evening, after a particularly grueling shift at the hospital, I found Mona rearranging the nursery I had spent weeks preparing. "This won't do," she declared, holding up the soft yellow blanket I had lovingly chosen. "The baby needs something more practical, not these frivolous things." I felt my anger rising, but I swallowed my words, not wanting to cause a scene. Instead, I retreated to my room, fighting back tears of frustration and helplessness. As the weeks wore on, Mona's behavior became increasingly intolerable. She would disappear for hours, leaving me to handle all the housework and childcare, only to return with a list of complaints about how I was failing as a wife and mother. I knew I needed to talk to Ethan, to make him understand how much his mother's presence was affecting me. But every time I tried, he would dismiss my concerns, saying that I was overreacting and that his mother meant well. I felt trapped, suffocated by the weight of Mona's constant criticism and Ethan's inability to see the truth. I longed for an escape, for someone to understand what I was going through. Little did I know that my breaking point was just around the corner, and it would come in the form of a life-threatening illness that would test the limits of my strength and the bonds of my family. As Mona settled into our home, I quickly realized that her offer to help was nothing more than a thinly veiled attempt to control every aspect of our lives. She took over the kitchen, insisting on cooking meals that catered to her tastes, disregarding the fact that I was struggling with morning sickness and food aversions. "Jade, you need to eat more," she would chide, pushing a plate of greasy bacon and eggs towards me. "You're eating for two now, and my grandchild needs proper nourishment." I would force myself to take a few bites, fighting the urge to gag, knowing that any protest would only lead to a lecture about my inadequacies as a mother. Mona's presence also put a strain on my relationship with Ethan. She would monopolize his time, insisting on long conversations about his work and his plans for the future, leaving little room for me to connect with my husband. One evening, as I was putting Lily to bed, I overheard Mona talking to Ethan in the living room. "You know, Ethan, you really should consider taking that promotion in New York. It's a fantastic opportunity, and you can't let Jade hold you back." I felt my heart sink as I listened to Ethan's response. "I know, Mom, but it's not that simple. Jade's job is here, and with the baby coming, I don't think it's the right time." "Nonsense," Mona scoffed. "Jade can find work anywhere, and I'll be here to help with the children. You need to think about your career, Ethan. Don't let her selfish desires ruin your chances of success." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How could Mona be so dismissive of my needs and desires? And why wasn't Ethan standing up for me? As the days turned into weeks, I found myself growing more and more resentful of Mona's presence in our home. She would criticize the way I dressed, the way I spoke, even the way I breathed. Nothing I did was ever good enough for her. "Really, Jade, you should take better care of yourself," she would say, eyeing my swollen ankles and exhausted face. "No wonder Ethan is always working late. Who would want to come home to this?" Her words cut deep, but I refused to let her see how much she was getting to me. I threw myself into my work, taking on extra shifts at the hospital, desperate for a reprieve from the constant criticism and belittlement. But even at work, I couldn't escape Mona's influence. She would call me constantly, demanding updates on my whereabouts and when I would be home. If I didn't answer right away, she would leave scathing voicemails, accusing me of neglecting my family. I knew I needed help, but I didn't know where to turn. My friends were all busy with their own lives, and I didn't want to burden them with my problems. I felt utterly alone, trapped in a nightmare of my own making. One afternoon, as I was leaving the hospital after a particularly grueling shift, I ran into my neighbor, Zoe. She took one look at my tear-stained face and pulled me into a tight hug. "Oh, honey, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. I broke down, pouring out all the frustrations and pain I had been holding in for so long. Zoe listened patiently, offering words of comfort and support. "You can't let her treat you like this, Jade," she said firmly. "You need to stand up for yourself, for your family. Ethan needs to know what's going on, and you need to set some boundaries with Mona." I knew Zoe was right, but the thought of confronting Mona filled me with dread. She had already proven herself to be a master manipulator, and I feared that any attempt to stand up to her would only make things worse. Little did I know that my fears were about to become a reality. and that the price of my silence would be higher than I ever could have imagined. Zoe's words echoed in my mind as I drove home from the hospital, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I knew I needed to talk to Ethan, to make him understand the hell I had been living in since Mona moved in, but the thought of facing his mother's wrath made my stomach churn. As I pulled into the driveway, I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the confrontation that was sure to come. I walked into the house, expecting to find Mona waiting for me with her usual barrage of insults and criticisms, but instead, I was greeted by an eerie silence. I made my way to the living room, where I found Ethan sitting on the couch, his head in his hands. He looked up as I entered, his eyes red and puffy from crying. "Ethan, what's wrong?" I asked, my voice filled with concern. "It's Mom," he said, his voice breaking. "She's gone." For a moment, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe Mona had finally realized the error of her ways and decided to leave on her own. But as I looked closer at Ethan's face, I realized that something was terribly wrong. "What do you mean she's gone?" I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. "She left a note," Ethan said, handing me a piece of paper. "She said she can't stand to be around us anymore, that we're ungrateful and selfish, and that she's going to stay with her friends until we come to our senses." I read the note, my eyes widening with each word. Mona had painted herself as the victim, claiming that I had driven her away with my constant demands and lack of appreciation for all she had done for us. "This is ridiculous," I said, crumpling the note in my fist. "She's the one who's been making our lives miserable, not the other way around." Ethan looked at me, his eyes filled with confusion and hurt. "I don't know what to believe anymore, Jade. Mom has always been there for me, and now she's saying all these terrible things about you. I just don't know what to do." I felt my anger rising, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Ethan, you have to trust me. Your mother has been manipulating you, manipulating all of us. She's not the victim here. We are." But even as I spoke the words, I could see the doubt in Ethan's eyes. Mona had always been his rock, his constant support, and the thought of her being anything less than perfect was almost too much for him to bear. Over the next few days, I tried my best to carry on as normal, but the weight of Mona's absence hung heavy in the air. Ethan was distant, spending long hours at work and barely speaking to me when he was home. Lily, too, seemed to sense that something was wrong, clinging to me more than usual and asking constantly when Grandma would be coming back. I knew I needed to do something, to find a way to make Ethan see the truth about his mother, but I was at a loss. Every time I tried to bring up the subject, he would shut down, retreating into himself and leaving me feeling more alone than ever. It was during one of these moments of despair that I finally broke down, collapsing onto the bed in a fit of tears. I felt like I was drowning, suffocating under the weight of Mona's manipulation and Ethan's inability to see the truth. As I lay there, my body racked with sobs, I heard a soft knock on the door. I looked up to see Zoe standing there, her face filled with concern. "Oh, Jade," she said, rushing to my side and pulling me into a hug. "I'm so sorry. I had no idea things had gotten this bad." I clung to her, pouring out all the pain and frustration I had been holding in for so long. Zoe listened patiently, offering words of comfort and support. "You can't let her win, Jade," she said firmly. "You have to keep fighting, for yourself and for your family. Ethan will come around eventually, but you have to be strong until then." I knew Zoe was right, but I also knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult. Mona had already proven herself to be a formidable opponent, and I feared that the price of standing up to her would be higher than I ever could have imagined. As the weeks passed, I threw myself into my work, taking on extra shifts at the hospital in a desperate attempt to escape the suffocating atmosphere at home. Ethan was rarely around, his business trips becoming more frequent and longer in duration. I knew he was using work as an excuse to avoid dealing with the tension between his mother and me, but I couldn't bring myself to confront him about it. One evening, as I was preparing dinner for Lily and myself, I felt a sharp pain in my chest. I tried to ignore it, attributing it to the stress and exhaustion of the past few months, but as the night wore on, the pain only intensified. By the time I put Lily to bed, I was struggling to breathe, my vision blurring at the edges. I knew I needed help, but Ethan was out of town, and I couldn't bear the thought of calling Mona. In a moment of desperation, I reached for my phone and dialed Zoe's number. "Jade, what's wrong?" she answered, her voice thick with sleep. "Zoe, I need help," I gasped, my words coming out in short, painful bursts. "I think there's something wrong with the baby." Zoe was at my door in minutes, her face pale with worry. She took one look at me and immediately called for an ambulance. As we waited for the paramedics to arrive, I felt a sense of dread wash over me. I knew that my condition was serious, and I feared for the life of my unborn child. When the ambulance finally arrived, I was barely conscious, my body racked with pain and fever. The paramedics worked quickly, loading me onto a stretcher and rushing me to the hospital. As I lay in the emergency room, hooked up to a myriad of machines and monitors, I overheard the doctors discussing my condition. "Pneumonia," they said, their voices grave. "And she's 7 months pregnant. We need to act fast." I felt a surge of panic wash over me. Pneumonia was serious enough on its own, but coupled with my pregnancy, it could be deadly. As the doctors worked to stabilize my condition, I drifted in and out of consciousness, my mind filled with thoughts of Lily and my unborn child. I knew I needed to fight, to be strong for them, but I could feel my body weakening with each passing minute. It was during one of these moments of lucidity that I remembered Mona. Despite everything she had put me through, I knew that she needed to be informed of my condition. I asked Zoe to contact her, hoping that she would put aside her animosity and be there for her son and grandchildren. But as the hours passed and Mona failed to appear, I began to realize the depths of her cruelty. Even in my darkest hour, she couldn't be bothered to show an ounce of compassion or concern. Ethan, on the other hand, rushed to my side as soon as he received word of my condition. He sat by my bedside, holding my hand and whispering words of encouragement, his eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry, Jade," he said, his voice breaking. "I should have been here for you, for our family. I promise things will be different from now on." I wanted to believe him, to take comfort in his words, but I knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult. Mona's influence had taken root, and it would take more than a few apologies to undo the damage she had caused. As I lay there, fighting for my life and the life of my unborn child, I couldn't help but wonder how things had gotten so bad. How had I allowed myself to become so isolated, so alone in my struggles? And how could I ever hope to rebuild my family in the face of such overwhelming adversity? But even in my darkest moments, I knew that I had to keep fighting. For Lily, for my unborn child, and for the life I knew we deserved. No matter what it took, I would find a way to break free from Mona's grip and reclaim the happiness that had been stolen from us. As I fought for my life in the hospital, Zoe remained by my side, a constant source of support and comfort. She sat with me for hours, holding my hand and wiping the sweat from my brow, her eyes filled with concern and compassion. "You're going to get through this, Jade," she said, her voice firm with conviction. "You're one of the strongest people I know, and you have so much to live for." I wanted to believe her, to take strength from her words, but the pain and exhaustion were overwhelming. I could feel my body weakening with each passing hour, and I feared that I might not have the strength to keep fighting. It was during one of these moments of despair that Ethan finally returned to the hospital, his face drawn and haggard. He had been away on business when I first fell ill, and it had taken him nearly 2 days to make it back to the city. "Jade, I'm so sorry," he said, his voice breaking as he took my hand in his. "I should have been here sooner. I never should have left you alone with my mother." I could see the guilt and regret in his eyes, and I knew that he was finally beginning to understand the toll that Mona's behavior had taken on our family. "It's not your fault, Ethan," I said, my voice weak and raspy. "You couldn't have known how bad things would get." But even as I spoke the words, I knew that they weren't entirely true. Ethan had seen the way his mother treated me, had heard the cruel words she spoke and the manipulative games she played. He had chosen to ignore it, to bury his head in the sand and hope that things would get better on their own. And now, as I lay in the hospital bed, fighting for my life and the life of our unborn child, the consequences of that choice had become all too clear. Over the next few days, my condition began to improve, thanks in no small part to the tireless efforts of the hospital staff. They worked around the clock to monitor my vital signs and adjust my medications, doing everything in their power to ensure that both the baby and I remained stable. Ethan rarely left my side during this time. His attention focused solely on my well-being and the well-being of our child. He slept in a chair by my bed, holding my hand and whispering words of love and encouragement, his eyes filled with a newfound determination. "I promise, Jade, things will be different from now on," he said, his voice firm with resolve. "I won't let my mother hurt you or our family ever again." I wanted to believe him, to take comfort in his words, but a part of me couldn't help but wonder if it was too little, too late. Mona's influence had taken root, and it would take more than a few promises to undo the damage she had caused. As the days turned into weeks, I slowly began to regain my strength, my body healing from the ravages of the pneumonia. The baby, too, seemed to be thriving, growing stronger with each passing day. But even as my physical health improved, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over me. Mona's absence weighed heavily on my mind, and I couldn't help but wonder what she was planning, what new scheme she might be hatching to tear our family apart. It was during one of these moments of anxiety that Zoe came to visit, her face filled with a mixture of concern and determination. "Jade, there's something you need to know," she said, her voice low and urgent. "I overheard Mona talking to one of her friends on the phone. She's planning to leave for a luxury cruise tomorrow, and she doesn't intend to come back until after the baby is born." I felt a surge of anger wash over me, hot and fierce. How could Mona be so selfish, so cruel? How could she abandon her own grandchild in their hour of need? But even as the anger burned within me, I knew that I couldn't let it consume me. I had to stay focused on my own recovery, on the health and well-being of my unborn child. And so, with a heavy heart and a newfound sense of determination, I began to plan for the future, a future without Mona and her toxic influence. I knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, but I also knew that I had the strength and the support to see it through. No matter what challenges lay ahead, I would fight for my family, for the life we deserved. And I would do it with the love and support of those who truly cared for me, those who would stand by my side through thick and thin. Mona lounged on the deck of the luxury cruise ship, sipping a cocktail and basking in the warm sun. She had been looking forward to this trip for months, a chance to escape the drama and responsibilities of family life and indulge in some much-needed relaxation. As she lay there, her mind drifted to thoughts of Jade and the baby. She knew that her daughter-in-law was still in the hospital, fighting for her life, but she couldn't bring herself to feel any real concern. In her mind, Jade had brought this on herself, with her constant demands and selfish behavior. Suddenly, Mona's phone buzzed with an incoming message. She glanced at the screen, expecting to see a text from one of her friends, but instead, she saw a voicemail from Lily. Curious, she pressed play and held the phone to her ear. At first, she couldn't make out what her granddaughter was saying, her voice muffled and distant. But as she listened more closely, she felt a chill run down her spine. "Grandma, please come home," Lily pleaded, her voice thick with tears. "Mommy is really sick, and the doctors say she might not make it. We need you here, Grandma. Please come back." Mona felt a surge of panic wash over her. She had never heard Lily sound so frightened, so desperate, and the thought of Jade actually dying, of leaving her grandchildren without a mother, was almost too much to bear. Without a second thought, Mona grabbed her bags and rushed off the ship, her mind racing with possibilities. She knew that she needed to get to the hospital as quickly as possible to be there for her son and grandchildren in their hour of need. As she raced through the airport, her phone clutched tightly in her hand, Mona couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled over her. She had always known that her behavior towards Jade was wrong, that her constant criticism and manipulation were taking a toll on their family. But she had never imagined that it would come to this, that her own selfishness could put the life of her unborn grandchild at risk. When she finally arrived at the hospital, Mona was met with a sight that made her blood run cold. Ethan was standing outside Jade's room, his face twisted with rage and disgust. "How dare you show your face here?" he spat, his voice shaking with anger. After everything you've done, after all the pain you've caused, you have the nerve to come crawling back now? Mona opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. She could see the hurt and betrayal in her son's eyes, and she knew that there was nothing she could say to make it right. Jade is fighting for her life in there, Ethan continued, his voice rising with each word. She's been through hell, and it's all because of you. Your constant criticism, your manipulative games, your selfish behavior. You've torn this family apart, and now you have the audacity to show up here and play the concerned grandmother? Mona felt tears streaming down her face, hot and shameful. She knew that Ethan was right, that she had no one to blame but herself for the state of their family. Ethan, please, she begged, her voice barely above a whisper. I know I've made mistakes, and I'm so sorry for all the pain I've caused. But please let me see Jade. Let me be there for her, for all of you. Ethan stared at her for a long moment, his eyes hard and unforgiving. Finally, he stepped aside, allowing her to enter the room. As Mona approached Jade's bedside, she felt a wave of guilt and shame wash over her. Her daughter-in-law lay there, pale and still, her body hooked up to a myriad of machines and monitors. Jade, I'm so sorry, Mona whispered, her voice choked with emotion. I never meant for things to get this bad. I never meant to hurt you or our family. But even as she spoke the words, Mona knew that they were too little, too late. The damage had been done, and it would take more than a few apologies to make things right. As she sat there holding Jade's hand and praying for a miracle, Mona knew that she had a long road ahead of her, a road of redemption, of making amends for all the pain and suffering she had caused. And she knew that it would be a difficult journey, one that would test her in ways she had never been tested before. But for the sake of her family, for the sake of the precious life growing inside Jade, she knew that she had to try. As I lay in the hospital bed, fighting through the haze of pain and medication, I could hear the sound of raised voices coming from the hallway. At first, I couldn't make out what they were saying, but as the voices grew louder and more agitated, I realized that it was Ethan and Mona. How could you be so selfish, so cruel? Ethan shouted, his voice shaking with anger. Jade is lying in there, fighting for her life, and you couldn't even be bothered to show up until now? Ethan, please, Mona pleaded, her voice trembling. I didn't know how serious it was. I thought... You thought what? Ethan interrupted, his voice dripping with disgust. That you could just abandon your family, go off on some luxury cruise and everything would be fine? That Jade would just magically get better, and you could come back and play the doting grandmother? I could hear the shame and regret in Mona's voice as she tried to explain herself, but Ethan wasn't having it. He had seen the toll that her behavior had taken on our family, the pain and suffering that she had caused, and he wasn't about to let her off the hook. You know, I used to look up to you, Ethan said, his voice growing quieter but no less intense. I used to think that you were the strongest, most capable person I knew, but now I see you for what you really are. A selfish, manipulative woman who cares more about her own pleasure than the well-being of her own family. Mona started to protest, but Ethan cut her off. No, I don't want to hear it. You've had your chance, and you blew it. You've caused nothing but pain and heartache for Jade, for our children and for me, and I won't stand for it anymore. I could hear the sound of footsteps, and then the door to my room opened. Ethan walked in, his face drawn and haggard, but his eyes filled with a fierce determination. Jade, I'm so sorry, he said, taking my hand in his. I'm sorry for not standing up to my mother sooner, for not protecting you the way I should have, but I promise things will be different from now on. I nodded, too weak to speak, but I could feel the love and support radiating from him. He had finally seen the truth about his mother, had finally understood the depths of her cruelty and manipulation, and he was ready to make a change. Over the next few days, as I slowly regained my strength, Ethan rarely left my side. He sat with me for hours, holding my hand and talking about our future, about the life we would build together without Mona's toxic influence. And when the time came for me to give birth, he was right there beside me, coaching me through every contraction and cheering me on as I brought our beautiful baby boy into the world. As I held my son in my arms, I couldn't help but feel a sense of hope and renewal wash over me. We had been through so much, had faced such incredible adversity, but we had come out the other side stronger and more united than ever before. And as I looked into Ethan's eyes, I knew that we would face whatever challenges lay ahead together, as a family. We had each other, and we had the love and support of those who truly cared for us, and that was all we needed to build the life we deserved. In the days and weeks that followed, I learned that Mona's friends, horrified by her behavior, had cut all ties with her. She was left alone and isolated, forced to confront the consequences of her actions and the pain she had caused. But for us, life went on. We moved forward, focusing on our family and the love we shared. And though the scars of the past would always be with us, we knew that we had the strength and resilience to overcome anything that came our way. As I watched Ethan play with our children, his face filled with joy and laughter, I knew that we had finally found the happiness and peace that we had always deserved. And I knew that, no matter what the future held, we would face it together, united in our love and our commitment to each other. As the weeks turned into months, I slowly began to heal, both physically and emotionally. The birth of our son had brought a newfound sense of joy and purpose to our lives, and Ethan and I were determined to cherish every moment we had together as a family. But even as we celebrated this new chapter in our lives, the specter of Mona's betrayal still loomed large. I couldn't shake the feeling of anger and resentment that had taken root in my heart, the sense that she had gotten away with her cruelty and manipulation for far too long. It was during one of my follow-up appointments with the doctor that I finally learned the true extent of Mona's isolation. As I sat in the waiting room, flipping through a magazine, I overheard two of the nurses talking about her. "Did you hear about that awful woman who abandoned her daughter-in-law when she was in the hospital?" one of them said, her voice dripping with disgust. "Yeah, I heard she went on some fancy cruise instead of being there for her family," the other replied. "What kind of monster does that?" I felt a surge of vindication wash over me. It seemed that Mona's actions had finally caught up with her, that the people in her life were starting to see her for who she really was. Later that day, as I was putting away some of the baby's clothes, I found a letter tucked away in the back of the drawer. It was from Mona, written in her familiar spidery handwriting. "Jade," the letter began, "I know that I have caused you and our family a great deal of pain, and for that I am truly sorry. I have spent the last few months reflecting on my actions, and I have come to realize the depths of my selfishness and cruelty." I felt my heart start to race as I read on, my eyes scanning the page for any hint of sincerity or remorse. "I know that I can never make up for the harm I have caused, but I want you to know that I am committed to being a better person, a better mother, and a better grandmother. I hope that someday you can find it in your heart to forgive me." I stared at the letter for a long moment, my mind racing with conflicting emotions. A part of me wanted to believe her, to think that she had truly changed and was ready to make amends. But another part of me, the part that had endured years of her manipulation and abuse, knew better. I had seen firsthand the depths of her cruelty, the way she had torn our family apart with her selfish behavior. And so, with a heavy heart, I tore the letter into pieces, watching as the fragments fluttered to the ground like confetti. I knew that I could never forgive Mona, could never let her back into our lives after all the pain she had caused. But I also knew that I couldn't let her betrayal define me, couldn't let it poison the love and happiness that Ethan and I had worked so hard to build. And so, I made a choice to focus on the future, on the life we had created together. A choice to surround myself with people who truly cared for me, who would stand by my side through thick and thin. In the years that followed, Ethan and I watched our children grow and thrive, our love for each other deepening with each passing day. We faced our challenges head-on, united in our commitment to each other and our family. And though the scars of the past would always be with us, we knew that we had the strength and resilience to overcome anything that came our way. As I watched Lily and our son play together in the backyard, their laughter ringing out like music, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. We had weathered the storm, had emerged from the darkness stronger and more united than ever before. And I knew that, no matter what the future held, We would face it together, bound by the unbreakable bonds of love and family. Mona's betrayal had taught me the true price of selfishness and cruelty, but it had also shown me the incredible power of forgiveness and hope. And that, I knew, was a lesson I would carry with me for the rest of my life. I take a deep breath as I step out of the car, my hand tightly clasped in Ethan's. The house looms before us, a stark reminder of the years of silence that stretch between Ethan and his father. I squeeze Ethan's hand, offering a reassuring smile. "It's going to be okay," I whisper, though the words feel hollow even to my own ears. Ethan nods, his jaw clenched tight. "Let's just get this over with," he mutters, striding towards the front door. I follow, my heart pounding in my chest as Ethan raises his hand to knock. The door swings open, revealing a man I've only seen in faded photographs. Frank, Ethan's father, stands before us, his face etched with lines of age and bitterness. "Ethan," he says, his voice gruff. "It's been a long time." "Dad," Ethan replies, his tone carefully neutral. "This is Zara, my wife." Frank's gaze shifts to me, his eyes narrowing slightly. "A pleasure," he says, though his tone suggests otherwise. We step inside, the house feeling strangely cold despite the warm summer day. Frank leads us to the living room, gesturing for us to sit. I perch on the edge of the couch, my hands folded tightly in my lap. "So," Frank begins, leaning back in his armchair, "what brings you here after all these years?" Ethan clears his throat, his eyes meeting mine briefly before he speaks. "Zara thought it was time we tried to mend things between us. For the sake of family." Frank scoffs, shaking his head. "Family? You haven't been much of a family to me, boy." I bristle at his words, but Ethan remains calm. "I know we've had our differences, Dad, but I'm here now, aren't I?" Frank grunts, his gaze shifting to the window. "I suppose you are." The conversation lulls, the tension thick in the air. I clear my throat, desperate to break the silence. "Ethan tells me you used to work in sales, Frank. What was that like?" Frank's eyes snap back to me, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. "It was a job," he says shortly. "Nothing more, nothing less." I nod, sensing that further questions won't be welcomed. We sit in awkward silence for a few more moments before Ethan stands abruptly. "We should get going," he says, his voice strained. "It's a long drive back." Frank nods, rising slowly from his chair. "Don't be a stranger," he says, though his words lack sincerity. We say our goodbyes, the door closing behind us with a heavy thud. As we walk back to the car, I can't shake the feeling that something is off. Frank's demeanor, his cold reception, it all feels wrong somehow. A month later, the phone rings. It's Frank, his voice tinged with desperation. "I need your help," he says, his words tumbling out in a rush. "I'm sick, and I can't take care of myself anymore. I need to move in with you and Ethan." I freeze, the phone nearly slipping from my grasp. "Move in with us?" After the way he treated Ethan at our visit, I glance at Ethan, seeing the conflicted emotions playing across his face. "We'll have to discuss it," I say finally, my voice trembling slightly. "Can we call you back?" Frank agrees, and I hang up the phone, my mind reeling. I turn to Ethan, my heart sinking at the look of resignation on his face. "He's my father," Ethan says softly. "I can't turn him away." I nod, knowing that Ethan's sense of duty will always win out in the end. But as we begin to make plans for Frank's arrival, I can't shake the feeling that we're making a terrible mistake. The day Frank moves in, I feel a sense of unease that I can't quite shake. Ethan and I help him settle into the guest room, arranging his few belongings and making sure he's comfortable. At first, things seem to be going smoothly. Frank is polite, even charming at times, and I start to think that maybe my initial reservations were unfounded. But as the weeks pass, I begin to notice little things that set off alarm bells in my head. Frank starts making offhand comments about money, hinting at the financial strain he's under. One evening, over dinner, he finally comes out with it. "I hate to ask," he says, his eyes downcast, "but I'm in a bit of a bind. My late wife, she left me with some significant gambling debts. I don't know how I'm going to pay them off." Ethan's fork clatters to his plate, his face etched with concern. "Dad, why didn't you say something sooner? We could have helped." Frank shakes his head, a wry smile on his lips. "I didn't want to be a burden, but now, living here with you, I thought maybe." He trails off, letting the implication hang in the air. I glance at Ethan, seeing the wheels turning in his head. "We can cover the debts," Ethan says finally. and you can stay here with us, save on living costs. It's the least we can do. I open my mouth to protest, but the words die on my lips. How can I argue with Ethan's generosity, his desire to help his father? So I nod, forcing a smile onto my face. Of course, I say, we're family after all. Frank's face breaks into a grin, and he reaches across the table to clasp Ethan's hand. Thank you, son. You don't know how much this means to me. But as I watch the exchange, I can't shake the feeling that something isn't right. There's a glint in Frank's eye, a calculating edge to his smile that makes my skin crawl. The next few weeks are a blur of financial discussions and budget adjustments. Ethan insists on paying off Frank's debts in full, even though it means dipping into our savings. I try to voice my concerns, but Ethan waves them away. He's my father, Zara, he says, his voice firm. I can't just turn my back on him. I nod, swallowing my objections. But as the days pass, I start to notice a change in Ethan. He seems distracted, distant, as if he's carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. One evening, he comes home late from work, his face drawn and tired. I'm in the kitchen, preparing dinner, when he walks in and slumps into a chair. I quit my job today, he says, his voice barely above a whisper. I nearly drop the spoon I'm holding, my heart leaping into my throat. What? Why? Ethan runs a hand through his hair, his eyes meeting mine. I want to start a nonprofit, Zara. I want to make a difference in the world. I stare at him, my mind reeling. A nonprofit? Now when we're already stretched thin financially? But before I can voice my concerns, Frank walks into the kitchen, his face twisted into a scowl. A nonprofit? He sneers, his voice dripping with disdain. How are you going to support us on that, boy? You think your little dream is more important than taking care of your family? Ethan flinches as if he's been slapped, his face flushing with shame. I just thought... You thought wrong, Frank snaps, cutting him off. You're being selfish, Ethan. You can't afford to chase your dreams when you have responsibilities. I watch as Ethan seems to shrink before my eyes, his shoulders slumping in defeat. And in that moment, I realize the truth. Frank isn't here because he needs our help. He's here to manipulate us, to bleed us dry and break us down, and I'll be damned if I let him get away with it. The days turn into weeks, and Frank's presence in our home becomes increasingly suffocating. He seems to take pleasure in belittling Ethan at every turn, constantly reminding him of the financial strain his nonprofit is putting on our family. I try to shield Ethan from the worst of it, but Frank's words have a way of worming their way into his mind. I watch as my once confident husband starts to doubt himself, his dreams slowly crumbling under the weight of his father's disapproval. One evening, I overhear Frank talking to Ethan in the living room. His voice is loud, carrying easily through the thin walls. You're a failure, Ethan, he says, his tone dripping with contempt. You think you can change the world with your little nonprofit? You can't even take care of your own family. I feel a surge of anger rising in my chest, and I storm into the room, my eyes blazing. That's enough, Frank, I snap, my voice trembling with rage. You have no right to speak to Ethan that way. Frank turns to me, his face twisted into a sneer. Stay out of this, Zara. This is between me and my son. But I refuse to back down. Ethan is my husband, I say, my voice growing stronger with each word, and I won't let you tear him down like this. Frank scoffs, shaking his head. You don't understand, girl. I'm trying to help him, to make him see the error of his ways. I laugh, the sound harsh and bitter. Help him? By crushing his dreams and making him feel worthless? That's not help, Frank. That's abuse. Ethan looks up at me, his eyes wide with surprise. I can see the gratitude in his gaze, the relief at having someone stand up for him. But Frank isn't finished. You think you're so smart, don't you, Zara? He says, his voice low and menacing. You think you know what's best for Ethan? Well, let me tell you something. I'm his father, and I know what's best for him. And what's best is for him to give up this foolish dream and focus on taking care of his family. I shake my head, my heart breaking for Ethan. You're wrong, Frank. Ethan's dream is what makes him who he is. It's what drives him, what gives him purpose, and I won't let you take that away from him. Frank's face darkens, and for a moment, I think he might lash out at me, but instead he turns and stalks out of the room, slamming the door behind him. I turn to Ethan, my heart aching at the defeated slump of his shoulders. I'm so sorry, I whisper, pulling him into my arms. I'm sorry you have to deal with this. Ethan clings to me, his body shaking with silent sobs. "I don't know what to do, Zara," he says, his voice muffled against my shoulder. I feel like I'm being pulled in 1,000 different directions. I stroke his hair, my mind racing with possibilities, and then, suddenly, it hits me. The pieces fall into place, and I realize the truth of what's been happening. "Ethan," I say, pulling back to look him in the eye, "I think your father is manipulating us. I think he's been planning this from the start." Ethan frowns, his brow furrowing in confusion. "What do you mean?" I take a deep breath, my mind whirling with the implications of what I'm about to say. "Think about it. He shows up out of nowhere, asking for money and a place to stay. He guilt-trips you into quitting your job and starting a nonprofit, knowing it will put a strain on our finances. And now he's constantly belittling you, making you feel like a failure." Ethan's eyes widen, and I can see the realization dawning on his face. "You're right," he says, his voice barely above a whisper. "But why? Why would he do this?" I shake my head, my heart heavy with the knowledge of what we're up against. "I don't know," I say, "but I intend to find out." The next day, I wait until Ethan leaves for work before confronting Frank. I find him in the living room, lounging in his armchair with a newspaper in his lap. "We need to talk," I say, my voice tight with anger. Frank looks up at me, his eyes narrowing. "About what?" I take a deep breath, steeling myself for the conversation to come. "I know what you're doing, Frank. I know you're manipulating Ethan, trying to bleed us dry." Frank's face hardens, and he sets the newspaper aside. "I don't know what you're talking about, Zara. I'm just a concerned father, trying to look out for my son." I shake my head, my hands clenching into fists at my sides. "No, you're not. You're a liar and a manipulator, and I won't let you get away with it." Frank stands up, his face twisting into a sneer. "You don't know anything, girl. You think you can come into my family and start making accusations? You have no idea what you're talking about." I stand my ground, refusing to be intimidated. "I know more than you think, Frank. I know about your debts, about how you've been using Ethan to pay them off." Frank's eyes widen, and for a moment I see a flicker of fear cross his face, but then his expression hardens and he takes a step towards me. "You think you're so clever, don't you, Zara?" he says, his voice low and menacing. "You think you've got it all figured out. Well, let me tell you something. You're right, I am in debt. But it's not from gambling. It's from failed business ventures, investments that went south." I stare at him, my mind reeling with the implications of his words. "So, you've been using Ethan to bail you out? To pay off your mistakes?" Frank shrugs, a cruel smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "What can I say? The boy owes me. I raised him, put a roof over his head. The least he can do is help his old man out in his time of need." I feel a surge of disgust rising in my throat, and I have to fight the urge to slap the smug look off his face. "You're despicable," I spit, my voice trembling with rage. "You're taking advantage of Ethan's love for you, his sense of duty. You're destroying him, piece by piece." Frank laughs, the sound harsh and grating. "Destroying him? Please. I'm making him stronger, teaching him the realities of life, and if he can't handle it, well, that's his problem." I shake my head, my heart breaking for Ethan. "You're wrong, Frank. Ethan is one of the strongest people I know, and he doesn't need you, not anymore." Frank's face darkens, and he takes another step towards me. "You think you can turn him against me? You think you can take my son away from me?" I stand my ground, my chin lifted in defiance. "I'm not taking him away from you, Frank. You're doing that yourself, with your lies and your manipulations." Frank's hand twitches at his side, and for a moment I think he might strike me. But instead, he turns away, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "You don't understand, Zara," he says, his voice barely above a whisper. "I have a plan, a way to get out of this mess. I was going to sell the house, force you and Ethan out. I even turned his sister against you, convinced her to take my side." I stare at him, my mind reeling with the depths of his betrayal. "You monster," I whisper, my voice trembling with emotion. "You would destroy your own family just to save yourself?" Frank turns back to me, his face a mask of desperation. "I have no choice, Zara. I'm drowning in debt, and I need a way out." I shake my head, my resolve hardening. "No, Frank, you do have a choice. You can face the consequences of your actions like a man. You can tell Ethan the truth and beg for his forgiveness." Frank's face twists into a sneer, and he turns away from me. I won't do that, Zara. I can't. I nod, my heart heavy with the knowledge of what I must do. Then I will, Frank. I'll tell Ethan everything, and we'll see how he reacts. But one thing is for sure. You won't be staying in this house any longer. Not if I have anything to say about it. The next few days are a blur of activity. I know I need to act fast, to gather evidence of Frank's betrayal before he has a chance to put his plan into action. I start by secretly recording our conversations, hiding my phone in my pocket and letting it capture every vile word that spills from Frank's lips. He talks about his debts, about his plans to sell the house and leave us with nothing. He even brags about turning Olivia against us, convincing her that we're the enemy. It's sickening to listen to, but I force myself to keep going, to gather as much evidence as I can. I know I'll need it if I'm going to convince Ethan of the truth. Finally, after days of recording, I have what I need. I wait until Ethan gets home from work, then pull him aside, my heart pounding in my chest. There's something you need to hear, I say, my voice trembling with emotion. I play the recordings for him, watching as his face goes from confusion to shock to anger. He listens in silence, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. When the last recording ends, he looks up at me, his eyes blazing with fury. I can't believe it, he whispers, his voice hoarse with emotion. My own father betraying me like this. I nod, my heart breaking for him. I'm so sorry, Ethan. I know how much you love him, how much you wanted to believe in him. Ethan shakes his head, his jaw clenched tight. No, Zara, you were right all along. He's been using me, manipulating me, and I let him do it. I reach out and take his hand, squeezing it gently. It's not your fault, Ethan. He's your father, and you wanted to believe the best of him. But now we need to focus on protecting ourselves, on getting away from him before he can hurt us anymore. Ethan nods, his eyes hardening with resolve. You're right. We need to sell the house, move out before he realizes what's happening. We spend the next few days in a flurry of activity, contacting real estate agents and packing up our belongings. We work in secret, but I was careful not to let Frank catch on to our plans. Finally, the day arrives. We found a buyer for the house, and everything is in place for us to move out. I wait until Frank leaves for one of his mysterious errands, then call Olivia, my hands shaking as I dial her number. Olivia, it's Zara, I say when she answers. There's something you need to hear. I play the recordings for her, my heart pounding as I wait for her reaction. At first, there's only silence on the other end of the line. Then I hear a sharp intake of breath, followed by a string of curses. That bastard, Olivia says, her voice trembling with anger. I can't believe I let him manipulate me like that. I feel a surge of relief wash over me, and I let out a shaky breath. It's not your fault, Olivia. He's good at what he does. But now we need to stand together to make sure he can't hurt anyone else. Olivia agrees, and we spend the next hour plotting our next move. By the time we hang up, I feel a sense of hope stirring in my chest. Maybe, just maybe, we can come out of this stronger than ever. The next day, Ethan and I load the last of our belongings into the moving truck and drive away from the house that has caused us so much pain. As we pull out of the driveway, I catch a glimpse of Frank's face in the rearview mirror. He looks shocked, angry, and maybe even a little afraid. But I don't let myself feel sorry for him. He made his choices, and now he has to live with the consequences. And as for Ethan and me, we have a whole new life ahead of us, one free from lies and manipulation. And I know deep in my heart that we're going to be just fine. We're barely settled into our new apartment when the phone rings. It's Frank, his voice tight with anger. What the hell do you think you're doing, Ethan? He shouts, his words slurring together. You can't just sell the house and leave me with nowhere to go. Ethan takes a deep breath, his hand clenching the phone so tightly his knuckles turn white. It's done, Dad. The house is sold, and we're not coming back. Frank lets out a string of curses, his voice rising with each word. You ungrateful little bastard. After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me? I see the pain flash across Ethan's face, and I reach out to take his hand, squeezing it gently. He looks at me, his eyes filled with gratitude, and turns back to the phone. You haven't done anything for me, Dad. You've been using me, manipulating me for your own gain, and I'm done letting you control my life. Frank scoffs, his voice dripping with disdain. You think you're so smart, don't you, Ethan? You think you can just walk away from me? From your family? Ethan's jaw clenches, and I can see the anger building in his eyes. You're not my family, Dad. Not anymore. A real family doesn't lie and cheat and steal from each other. There's a long pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment I think Frank might have hung up. But then his voice comes through the speaker, low and menacing. You'll regret this, Ethan. You and that bitch wife of yours. You think you can just walk away from me? You have no idea what I'm capable of. I feel a chill run down my spine at his words, but Ethan doesn't flinch. I know exactly what you're capable of, Dad, and that's why we're walking away. You can't hurt us anymore. He hangs up the phone, his hand trembling slightly as he sets it down on the table. I wrap my arms around him, holding him close as he takes a shuddering breath. I'm so proud of you, I whisper, my voice thick with emotion. You did the right thing, Ethan. You stood up to him, and you won. Ethan nods, his eyes filling with tears. I couldn't have done it without you, Zara. You gave me the strength to fight back, to take control of my life. I smile, brushing a tear from his cheek. We did it together, Ethan, and we'll keep doing it together, no matter what comes our way. The next few days are tense, as we wait for Frank to make his next move. But as the weeks pass and nothing happens, we start to relax, to settle into our new life. And then, one day, there's a knock at the door. I open it to find Olivia standing there, her face streaked with tears. I'm so sorry, Zara, she whispers, her voice trembling. I should have believed you from the start. I should have known that Dad was lying to me. I pull her into a hug, my own eyes filling with tears. It's okay, Olivia, you're here now, and that's all that matters. We spend the next few hours talking, catching up on all the time we've lost. Olivia tells us about her own struggles with Frank, about how he's been trying to turn her against us for years. But I see the truth now, she says, her voice filled with determination, and I'm not going to let him control me anymore. I'm done being his pawn. Ethan nods, his eyes shining with pride. We're in this together, Olivia. All of us. We'll stand up to him, and we'll win. As the sun sets outside our window, I feel a sense of peace wash over me. We've been through so much, Ethan and I, but we've come out stronger on the other side. And with Olivia by our side, I know that nothing can stop us now. We're a family, a real family, and we'll face whatever comes our way together. A few days later, we get another call from Frank. This time it's Olivia he's after, his voice desperate and pleading. Olivia, sweetheart, you have to help me, he begs, his words tumbling out in a rush. I'm in trouble, and I need a place to stay. You're my only hope. Olivia's face hardens, and she grips the phone tighter. No, Dad, I'm not going to help you. Not after everything you've done. Frank's voice rises, his anger palpable even through the phone. You ungrateful little brat. I raised you. I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me? Olivia takes a deep breath, her eyes flashing with determination. You didn't give me anything, Dad. You took from me. You manipulated me. You tried to turn me against my own brother. And I'm done letting you control my life. There's a long pause, and then Frank's voice comes through the speaker, low and menacing. You'll regret this, Olivia. You and your brother and that bitch wife of his. You think you can just turn your back on me? You have no idea what I'm capable of. But Olivia doesn't flinch. I know exactly what you're capable of, Dad, and that's why I'm saying no. You can't hurt me anymore, and you can't hurt Ethan and Zara either. We're done with you. She hangs up the phone, her hand shaking slightly as she sets it down. Ethan wraps an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. I'm so proud of you, Olivia, he says, his voice thick with emotion. You did the right thing. Olivia nods, leaning into his embrace. I couldn't have done it without you and Zara. You showed me what real love looks like, what a real family is supposed to be. I feel my own eyes fill with tears as I watch them, my heart swelling with love and pride. We've been through so much together, the three of us, but we've come out stronger on the other side. The next day, Ethan and I make a decision. We're going to use the money from the sale of the house to pay off Frank's debts, to free ourselves from his grip once and for all. We contact his creditors, explaining the situation and offering to settle his debts in full. It's not easy and it takes a big chunk out of our savings, but in the end, it's worth it. We meet with Frank one last time in a neutral location with Olivia by our side. He looks haggard, his eyes bloodshot and his clothes rumpled. What do you want? He asks, his voice hoarse and defeated. Ethan steps forward, his chin held high. "We're here to tell you that your debts have been paid, Dad. You're free and clear." Frank's eyes widen, and for a moment, I see a flicker of hope cross his face. But then, his expression hardens and he narrows his eyes. "What's the catch?" he asks, his voice dripping with suspicion. I step forward, my own voice steady and clear. "There is no catch, Frank. We paid off your debts because we wanted to be free of you, once and for all. But that freedom comes at a price. You're on your own now, and you'll have to find your own way in the world." Frank's face crumples, and for a moment, I almost feel sorry for him. But then I remember all the pain he's caused, all the lies he's told, and my sympathy vanishes. "You can't do this to me," he whispers, his voice breaking. "I'm your father, Ethan. You can't just abandon me." Ethan shakes his head, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and resolve. "You stopped being my father the moment you chose to lie to me, to manipulate me for your own gain. And now, you have to face the consequences of your actions." We turn to leave, our hearts heavy, but our heads held high. As we walk away, I hear Frank's voice behind us, a broken whisper that tears at my heart. "I'm sorry," he says, his words barely audible. "I'm so sorry." But it's too late for apologies, too late for forgiveness. We've made our choice, and we're not looking back. Months pass, and life goes on. Ethan and I settle into our new routine, our new life together. His nonprofit takes off, and I watch with pride as he pours his heart and soul into making a difference in the world. Olivia becomes a regular fixture in our lives, stopping by for dinner and movie nights, her laughter filling our home with warmth and joy. It's like we've always been this way, a family bound by love and trust, not by blood or obligation. But even as we move forward, the shadow of Frank still lingers. Ethan tries to hide it, but I can see the pain in his eyes whenever his father's name is mentioned, the guilt that still weighs heavy on his heart. One day, I come home from work to find Ethan sitting at the kitchen table, his head in his hands. I rush to his side, my heart pounding with worry. "What's wrong?" I ask, my voice trembling. "Is it your dad? Did something happen?" Ethan looks up at me, his eyes red-rimmed and bloodshot. "I talked to Olivia today. She said Dad's not doing well. He's living in some run-down apartment, barely getting by on Social Security. She thinks we should reach out to him, try to make amends." I feel a flare of anger at the mention of Frank, but I push it down, focusing on Ethan's pain. "What do you want to do?" I ask, my voice gentle. Ethan shakes his head, his eyes filling with tears. "I don't know, Zara. Part of me wants to help him, to be the bigger person, but another part of me is still so angry, so hurt by what he did. I don't know if I can forgive him." I take his hand in mine, squeezing it gently. "You don't have to forgive him, Ethan. What he did to you, to us, is unforgivable. But maybe you can find a way to let go of the anger, to move on with your life." Ethan nods, his jaw clenching with determination. "You're right. I need to let go, to focus on the future, not the past." We decide to reach out to Frank, to offer him a small monthly stipend to help with his expenses. It's not much, but it's a start, a way to ease the guilt that still weighs on Ethan's heart. But when we try to contact him, we're met with silence. Calls go unanswered, emails bounce back undeliverable. It's like Frank has disappeared, vanished into thin air. Weeks turn into months, and still, there's no word from him. Olivia tries to track him down, but even she comes up empty-handed. It's like he's gone, a ghost haunting the edges of our lives. And then one day, there's a knock at the door. I open it to find a man standing there, his face lined with age and sorrow. "I'm sorry to bother you," he says, his voice hesitant, "but I'm looking for Frank Johnson. I'm his landlord, and I haven't seen him in weeks. I was hoping you might know where he is." I feel a chill run down my spine at his words, a sense of dread settling in the pit of my stomach. "I'm sorry," I say, my voice shaking. "We haven't heard from Frank in months. Is everything okay?" The man shakes his head, his eyes filled with pity. "I'm afraid not. Frank's apartment was a mess when I went in there. It looks like he hasn't been taking care of himself. I found a bunch of empty bottles, some pills scattered on the floor. I think he might be in trouble." I nod, my heart heavy with sorrow. "Thank you for letting us know. We'll do what we can to find him, to get him the help he needs." But even as I say the words, I know it's too late. Frank is gone, lost to his own demons, his own mistakes, and all we can do is pick up the pieces. to try to build a life without him. As I close the door, I feel a sense of sadness wash over me. But I also feel a sense of hope, a sense of possibility. We've been through so much, Ethan and I, but we've come out stronger on the other side. And whatever the future holds, I know we'll face it together, hand in hand, heart to heart. Because that's what family does. That's what love is all about. The biting cold seeps through my bones as I shuffle towards the front door, my arthritic hands trembling. Who could be knocking at this ungodly hour, in the middle of a raging blizzard? I crack open the door, and my heart shatters. There, shivering on my doorstep, is Theo, my precious grandson. His tear-stained face is pale, his lips tinged blue. "Grandma," he whimpers, "I'm so cold and hungry." I usher him inside, my mind reeling. "Theo, sweetheart, what are you doing here? Where are your parents?" He looks up at me, his eyes filled with a pain no child should know. They told me to wait in the car, but it was so cold, Grandma. I waited for hours, but they never came back. Anger boils in my veins, but I push it down. Right now, Theo needs me. I wrap him in a warm embrace, feeling his small body tremble against mine. "It's okay, darling, you're safe now. Let's get you warmed up and fed." As I prepare a steaming bowl of chicken soup, Theo sits at the kitchen table, his thin shoulders hunched. The sight breaks my heart. How could Marla and Jonah do this to their own child? "Here you go, sweetheart. Eat up." I place the bowl in front of him, and he devours it like he hasn't eaten in days. Perhaps he hasn't. "Grandma," he says between spoonfuls, "I don't want to go back. They forget about me. I'm always alone." Tears sting my eyes, but I blink them away. I need to be strong for Theo. "You don't have to go back, darling. You can stay with me as long as you need." As I tuck Theo into bed that night, his small hand clutches mine. "I love you, Grandma," he whispers, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. "I love you too, Theo. More than anything." Long after he drifts off to sleep, I sit in the darkness, my mind churning. How could I have let this happen? I knew Marla and Jonah were irresponsible, but this is unforgivable. I think back to when Marla was growing up, how I poured my heart and soul into raising her. But somewhere along the way, she changed. She became distant, entitled. She met Jonah, and things only got worse. They'd show up at my door, demanding money, claiming they were struggling. But I saw through their lies. Designer clothes, fancy cars, lavish vacations. They were living the high life while their son suffered. I tried to reason with them, to make them see the error of their ways. But they brushed me off, mocking my concerns. "You're just a bitter old woman," Marla sneered. "You don't understand our lives." But I understand all too well. I've seen the pain in Theo's eyes, the longing for love and attention, and I'll be damned if I let it continue. As the blizzard rages on outside, I make a silent vow. I will protect Theo, no matter the cost. I will give him the love and stability he deserves, and I will make Marla and Jonah pay for their neglect. They may have forgotten their responsibilities, but I will not forget this injustice. The storm inside me is just beginning, and I will not rest until Theo is safe and his parents face the consequences of their actions. I wake up to the sound of Theo's soft snores, his small body curled up beside me. The events of last night flood back, and I feel a fresh wave of anger wash over me. How could Marla, my own daughter, neglect her child like this? As I make breakfast, my mind drifts to the past. I remember the day Marla was born, the joy and love that filled my heart. I devoted my life to raising her, sacrificing my own dreams to ensure she had every opportunity. But as she grew older, something changed. She became distant, always demanding more. More money, more attention, more freedom. I tried to guide her, to teach her the value of hard work and responsibility, but she pushed me away. "You're suffocating me," she'd scream. "I'm an adult now. I don't need you telling me what to do." When she met Jonah, I had hoped he would be a stabilizing force in her life, but he was just as reckless and irresponsible as she was. They'd come to me, begging for money, spinning tales of hardship and struggle. At first, I believed them. I gave them what I could, even when it meant sacrificing my own comfort. But then I started to notice the signs, the expensive clothes, the flashy gadgets, the constant partying. I confronted them, my voice shaking with anger and disappointment. "How can you live like this?" I asked. "What about Theo? What about your responsibilities?" Marla laughed, a cruel, mocking sound. "Responsibilities? We're young, Mom. We deserve to have fun. Theo's fine." He's got a roof over his head and food in his belly. What more does he need? I was stunned, my heart breaking at her callous words. He needs love, Marla. He needs his parents. Jonah stepped forward, his face twisted in a sneer. Love doesn't pay the bills, old woman. We're doing the best we can. If you're so concerned, why don't you take him? I opened my mouth to respond, but they were already walking away, their laughter echoing in the air. That was the last time I saw them, until last night when Theo showed up at my door, shivering and alone. A small hand tugs at my sleeve, pulling me from my thoughts. Grandma, I'm hungry. I smiled down at Theo, pushing away the painful memories. Of course, sweetheart. Let's get you some breakfast. As we eat, I watch Theo taking in his thin frame and the shadows under his eyes. He's been through so much, more than any child should have to bear. Theo, I say softly, I want you to know that you can always come to me. No matter what, I will always be here for you. He looks up at me, his eyes filled with a wisdom beyond his years. I know, Grandma, you're the only one who cares about me. Those words, spoken with such certainty, break my heart all over again, but they also fuel my determination. I will not let Marla and Jonah continue to neglect their son. I will not let Theo suffer any longer. I may be just a retired school teacher, but I have a lifetime of experience and a grandmother's love on my side. I will gather the evidence I need, no matter how long it takes. I will fight for Theo's future, even if it means going against my own daughter. Marla and Jonah may have forgotten what it means to be a parent, but I will never forget what it means to be a grandmother, and I will do whatever it takes to give Theo the life he deserves. Days turn into weeks, and Theo starts to open up to me. We spend our evenings curled up on the couch, watching his favorite movies and sharing stories. It's during one of these moments that he begins to talk about his life with Marla and Jonah. They always forget about me, he says, his voice barely a whisper. They leave me alone for hours, sometimes days. I get so hungry, Grandma. My heart clenches, and I pull him closer. What do you do when you're hungry, sweetheart? He shrugs, his small shoulders heavy with burden. I try to find food in the kitchen, but there's never much. Mommy and Daddy buy lots of stuff for themselves, but they forget to buy food for me. Anger boils inside me, but I keep my voice steady. What kind of stuff do they buy, Theo? Lots of clothes and shiny things. Daddy always has a new watch or a new phone, and Mommy buys so many shoes and bags. But when I ask for new clothes or toys, they say we don't have money. I close my eyes, trying to calm the rage that threatens to consume me. How can they be so selfish, so negligent? Theo, I want you to know that what they're doing is wrong. You deserve so much better, and I'm going to make sure you get it. He looks up at me, his eyes filled with a tentative hope. Really, Grandma? You promise? I promise, sweetheart, I won't let them hurt you anymore. That night, as Theo sleeps, I start to plan. I know I need evidence, solid proof of Marla and Jonah's neglect. I can't just make accusations without backing them up. I start to keep a journal, documenting every detail Theo shares with me. Every missed meal, every lonely night, every broken promise. It breaks my heart to write it all down, but I know it's necessary. I also begin to track their spending, using the skills I learned as a school teacher to create detailed spreadsheets. Designer clothes, expensive gadgets, lavish vacations, all while their son goes hungry and neglected. Weeks turn into months, and my evidence grows. Theo starts to thrive under my care, his laughter filling the house once more. He excels in school, makes new friends, and discovers a love for painting. But the shadow of his parents' neglect still hangs over him. He has nightmares, waking up screaming in the middle of the night. He flinches at loud noises and unexpected touches. The scars they've left on his heart will take time to heal. One evening, as we're sitting at the dinner table, Theo looks up at me with a seriousness that breaks my heart. Grandma, do you think Mommy and Daddy love me? I reach across the table, taking his small hand in mine. I think they love you in their own way, Theo, but sometimes people make bad choices. They forget what's really important. He nods, his eyes filled with a wisdom beyond his years. I'm glad I have you, Grandma. You always remember what's important. Tears fill my eyes and I squeeze his hand. And I always will, sweetheart. I will always put you first. Always. That night, as I tuck Theo into bed, I make a silent promise. I will confront Marla and Jonah. I will make them see the error of their ways. And if they don't change, if they don't step up and be the parents Theo deserves, I will take action. I may be just a grandmother, but I have the power of love and the strength of determination on my side. And I will use every ounce of it to protect my grandson and give him the life he deserves. The day I've been dreading finally arrives. Marla and Jonah show up at my doorstep, their faces etched with same entitled smirks I've come to despise. They breeze past me into the living room, not even bothering to ask about Theo. "We need money, Mom," Marla says, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Jonah lost his job and we're struggling to make ends meet. I stare at her, incredulous. "You're struggling? What about Theo? Do you have any idea what he's been through?" Jonah scoffs, rolling his eyes. "Oh, please. The kid's fine. He's got a roof over his head and clothes on his back. What more does he need?" Anger surges through me, hot and fierce. "He needs love, Jonah. He needs attention and care. He needs parents who put him first." Marla laughs, a harsh, grating sound. "Love doesn't pay the bills, Mom. We're doing the best we can. Now, are you going to help us or not?" I take a deep breath, trying to calm the rage that threatens to consume me. "No, Marla, I'm not going to help you. Not until you start being the parents Theo deserves." Their faces twist with anger, and Jonah takes a step forward, his fists clenched. "You don't get to tell us how to raise our kid, old woman. We're his parents, not you." I stand my ground, meeting his gaze head on. "Parents, you don't deserve to call yourselves that. Theo has been here for months, and not once have you checked on him. Not once have you asked about his well-being." Marla rolls her eyes, her lips curled in a sneer. "He's just a kid, Mom. He doesn't know what he wants. We're the adults here." I shake my head, my heart breaking for the child they've so carelessly cast aside. "Theo knows exactly what he wants, Marla. He wants love, he wants attention, he wants to feel like he matters." Jonah laughs, a cold, cruel sound. "Love isn't going to pay our bills or put food on the table. We need money, and we need it now." I feel a surge of anger so strong it nearly takes my breath away. "Get out of my house. Now." Marla's eyes widen and she takes a step back. "What?" "You heard me. Get out, and don't come back until you're ready to be the parents Theo deserves." Jonah's face turns red and he takes a menacing step forward. "You can't do this. He's our kid, not yours." I stand tall, my voice steady and firm. "Watch me. I will do whatever it takes to protect Theo from your neglect and selfishness, even if it means going against my own daughter." Marla's eyes narrow, and she grabs Jonah's arm. "Come on, we don't need this. We'll find the money somewhere else." They storm out of the house, slamming the door behind them. I sink onto the couch, my heart racing and my hands shaking. I know I've just crossed a line, but I don't care. Theo's well-being is all that matters now. I hear a small voice from the doorway, and I look up to see Theo standing there, his eyes wide and frightened. "Grandma, are you okay?" I open my arms, and he runs into them, burying his face in my chest. I hold him tight, my heart swelling with love and determination. "I'm okay, sweetheart. Everything's going to be okay, I promise." As I hold Theo in my arms, I know that I've just started a war. Marla and Jonah won't give up easily, and they'll do everything in their power to make my life a living hell. But I'm ready for the fight. I have the truth on my side, and I have the love of a child who deserves so much better. I will not back down. I will not let them win. I will fight for Theo's future, no matter what it takes. The confrontation with Marla and Jonah leaves me shaken, but more determined than ever. I know I need to act fast, to gather the evidence I need to protect Theo. I can't let them take him back, not when he's just starting to heal. I spend the next few days making phone calls and doing research. I hire a private investigator, a woman named Sarah, who comes highly recommended. She listens to my story with a sympathetic ear and promises to do everything she can to help. "I've seen cases like this before," she says, her voice gentle but firm. "Parents who prioritize their own wants over their child's needs. It's a tough battle, but it's one worth fighting." I nod, my heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you, Sarah. I don't know what I would do without your help." She smiles, patting my hand. "You're doing the right thing, Celine. Theo is lucky to have you in his corner." With Sarah on the case, I turn my attention to documenting Theo's time with me. I start a journal, writing down every milestone and every happy moment. I take pictures of him laughing, playing, and thriving in my care. I also start to gather evidence of my own financial stability. I may be a retired school teacher, but I've always been careful with my money. I have a comfortable savings account and a paid-off mortgage. I can provide for Theo in ways that Marla and Jonah never could. Theo seems to sense the change in me, the newfound purpose that drives my every action. He starts to open up more, sharing his fears and his hopes for the future. "Grandma, do you think I could be an artist someday?" he asks one evening, as we sit together on the porch swing. I smile, my heart swelling with pride. "Of course you can, sweetheart. You can be anything you want to be, and I'll be here to support you every step of the way." He leans his head against my shoulder, his small body relaxing into mine. "I love you, Grandma. Thank you for taking care of me." Tears fill my eyes, and I wrap my arms around him, holding him close. "I love you too, Theo. More than anything in this world." As the weeks pass, Sarah keeps me updated on her progress. She's managed to document Marla and Jonah's lavish spending habits, their frequent trips to expensive restaurants and exclusive clubs. She's also captured photos of Theo's old room, the bare walls and the empty fridge. "It's clear that they're not providing for his basic needs," she says, her voice tight with anger. "No child should have to live like that." I nod, my heart breaking all over again. What's our next step? Sarah takes a deep breath, her eyes meeting mine. We file for emergency custody. We present the evidence to a judge and show them that Theo is better off in your care. I feel a flicker of fear, but I push it down. I know this is the right thing to do. I know this is what Theo needs. "Let's do it," I say, my voice steady and strong. "Let's fight for Theo's future." That night, as I tuck Theo into bed, I make him a promise. "I will always fight for you, sweetheart. No matter what happens, no matter what anyone says, you are my world, and I will do everything in my power to keep you safe and happy." He smiles up at me, his eyes shining with love and trust. "I know you will, Grandma. You're my hero." I kiss his forehead, my heart swelling with a fierce, unshakable love. I may be just a grandmother, but I have the power to change Theo's life, and I will not rest until he has the future he deserves. The day I've been waiting for finally arrives. Sarah calls me, her voice tight with excitement. "I have the evidence, Celine. It's even worse than we thought." I feel a chill run down my spine, my heart pounding in my chest. "What did you find?" "I managed to get my hands on their bank statements and credit card bills. They've been spending thousands of dollars on designer clothes, expensive dinners, and lavish vacations. Meanwhile, Theo's school records show that he's been showing up to class in worn-out clothes and without lunch money." I close my eyes, my stomach churning with anger and disgust. "That's not all," Sarah continues, her voice trembling with rage. "I also got footage from a hidden camera I placed outside their house. It shows Marla and Jonah leaving Theo alone for hours on end, sometimes even overnight, while they're out partying and living it up." Tears fill my eyes and I grip the phone tighter. I knew it was bad, but this is unforgivable. "We have more than enough evidence to file for emergency custody," Sarah says, her voice firm and determined. "I'll start putting together the paperwork right away." "Thank you, Sarah," I whisper, my heart swelling with gratitude. "I don't know what I would do without you." "You're welcome, Celine. Theo is lucky to have you fighting for him." I hang up the phone, my mind reeling with the weight of what I've just learned. I knew Marla and Jonah were neglectful, but seeing the proof laid out in front of me is a whole different level of horror. I take a deep breath, trying to calm the rage that courses through my veins. I know I need to be strong for Theo, to show him that he has someone in his corner who will never let him down. I find him in the living room, curled up on the couch with a book. He looks up when I enter, his eyes wide and curious. "Is everything okay, Grandma?" I sit down beside him, taking his small hand in mine. "Everything's going to be okay, sweetheart. I have some news for you." He sits up straighter, his face etched with concern. "What is it?" I take a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. "I've been working with a private investigator to gather evidence of how your parents have been treating you, and we've found enough to prove that you're better off living with me." His eyes widen and he squeezes my hand tighter. "You mean I don't have to go back to them?" I shake my head, my heart breaking at the relief in his voice. "No, sweetheart, you never have to go back to them again. I'm going to fight for custody of you to make sure you have a safe and happy home. Tears fill his eyes, and he throws his arms around me, burying his face in my chest. Thank you, Grandma. Thank you so much. I hold him tight, my own tears falling freely. You don't have to thank me, Theo. You deserve so much better than what they've given you, and I'm going to make sure you get it. We sit like that for a long time, holding each other and crying tears of relief and joy. I know the road ahead won't be easy, that Marla and Jonah will fight me every step of the way. But I also know that I have the truth on my side and the love of a child who deserves the world. And I will not rest until he has the life he's always dreamed of. As the sun sets outside the window, casting a warm glow over the room, I feel a sense of peace wash over me. I may be just a grandmother, but I have the power to change Theo's life, and I will not let him down. The courtroom is packed, the air thick with tension and anticipation. I sit beside Theo, holding his hand tightly as we wait for the judge to enter. Sarah is on my other side, her presence a comforting reminder of the truth we're fighting for. Marla and Jonah sit across the aisle, their faces etched with anger and resentment. They glare at me, their eyes filled with a hatred that takes my breath away. But I refuse to back down, refuse to let them intimidate me. The judge enters and the room falls silent. He's an older man, with a kind face and a no-nonsense demeanor. He looks at Theo, his eyes softening with compassion. We're here today to determine the best interests of the child, Theo, he says, his voice firm but gentle. I've reviewed the evidence presented by both sides, and I must say I'm deeply troubled by what I've seen. He turns to Marla and Jonah, his face hardening. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, the evidence against you is overwhelming. Bank statements, credit card bills, and video footage all show a pattern of neglect and emotional abuse. You've consistently prioritized your own wants and needs over the well-being of your child. Marla stands up, her face flushed with anger. That's not true, she shouts, her voice shrill and desperate. We love Theo. We've always done what's best for him. The judge shakes his head, his eyes narrowing. The evidence says otherwise, Mrs. Johnson. You've left your child alone for hours, even days at a time. You've failed to provide him with basic necessities like food and clothing, and you've repeatedly ignored his emotional needs in favor of your own selfish desires. Jonah stands up, his fists clenched at his sides. This is all her fault, he yells, pointing at me. She's poisoned Theo against us. She's just a bitter old woman who wants to steal our son. I feel Theo flinch beside me, and I squeeze his hand tighter. The judge turns to me, his face softening. Miss Celine, I've reviewed the documentation you've provided of your time with Theo. It's clear that you've provided him with a stable, loving home. You've put his needs first, and you've given him the emotional support he so desperately needs. Tears fill my eyes and I nod, my voice trembling. I love Theo with all my heart. All I want is for him to have the life he deserves. The judge nods, his face etched with determination. And that's exactly what he's going to get. He turns back to Marla and Jonah, his voice firm and uncompromising. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, I'm granting full custody of Theo to his grandmother, effective immediately. You will have supervised visitation once a month, but only if Theo wants to see you. And you will be required to attend parenting classes and therapy sessions to address your neglectful behavior. Marla collapses into her seat, her face buried in her hands. Jonah stands there, his mouth hanging open in shock. The judge turns to Theo, his face softening once again. Theo, I want you to know that none of this is your fault. You are a brave, wonderful child, and you deserve all the love and happiness in the world. Your grandmother is going to take good care of you, and you never have to worry about being neglected or forgotten again. Theo looks up at me, his eyes shining with tears. Thank you, Grandma, he whispers, his voice choked with emotion. Thank you for fighting for me. I wrap my arms around him, holding him close as the tears stream down my face. I will always fight for you, sweetheart. Always. As we leave the courtroom, hand in hand, I feel a sense of relief wash over me. The battle is won, but the healing has just begun. I know there will be tough days ahead, moments when Theo's pain and trauma will threaten to overwhelm him, but I also know that I will be there for him every step of the way. I will love him, support him, and guide him towards the bright future he deserves, and I will never, ever let him forget how much he is loved. The days after the custody hearing are a whirlwind of activity. Theo and I settle into a new routine, one filled with laughter, love, and endless possibilities. We enroll him in a new school, one with a strong arts program and a nurturing environment. Theo thrives in his new surroundings, his confidence growing with each passing day. He makes new friends, joins the school's art club, and even starts taking piano lessons. I watch with pride as he blossoms into the happy, healthy child he was always meant to be. But the scars of his past are never far from the surface. There are nights when he wakes up screaming, his nightmares filled with the echoes of Marla and Jonah's neglect. There are moments when he flinches at loud noises or unexpected touches, his body still remembering the trauma he endured. But through it all, I am there for him. I hold him when he cries, soothe him when he's scared, and remind him every day of how loved and valued he is. Slowly but surely, the wounds begin to heal, and the light returns to his eyes. Marla and Jonah, on the other hand, face the consequences of their actions. The judge's ruling sends shockwaves through our small town, and soon the whispers begin. People who once admired them for their wealth and status now look at them with disgust and contempt. They lose friends, business deals, and their once pristine reputation. Marla tries to play the victim, spinning tales of how I stole her child and ruined her life. But no one believes her, not when the evidence of her neglect is so clear. Jonah, unable to handle the shame and humiliation, leaves town in the middle of the night, never to be seen again. Marla is left alone, a shell of the woman she once was. I almost feel sorry for her until I remember the pain she inflicted on her own child. Months pass and life settles into a new normal. Theo and I create new traditions, new memories to replace the painful ones of his past. We have movie nights and game nights, weekend hikes and lazy Sundays spent painting in the backyard. And then one day, something remarkable happens. Theo comes home from school, his face flushed with excitement. "Grandma, guess what? My artwork is going to be featured in the school's art show." I feel a surge of pride so strong it nearly takes my breath away. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you." He beams at me, his eyes shining with joy. "I couldn't have done it without you, Grandma. You believed in me when no one else did." Tears fill my eyes and I pull him into a tight hug. "I will always believe in you, Theo. Always." The night of the art show arrives, and Theo's piece is the star of the show. It's a beautiful painting of a phoenix rising from the ashes, its wings spread wide against a blazing sky. The symbolism is clear, and it takes my breath away. As we stand there admiring his work, a familiar voice cuts through the crowd. "Theo? Is that you?" We turn to see Marla standing there, her face etched with a mix of shock and longing. Theo stiffens beside me, his hand reaching for mine. "What are you doing here?" I ask, my voice cold and unforgiving. Marla takes a step forward, her eyes filled with tears. "I wanted to see my son's artwork. I wanted to tell him how proud I am of him." Theo looks up at me, his face conflicted. I squeeze his hand, giving him the strength he needs. "You lost the right to be proud of me when you abandoned me," he says, his voice trembling but strong. "Grandma is my family now. She's the one who loves me and takes care of me." Marla's face crumples, and she nods, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "I know, and I'm sorry, Theo. I'm so sorry for everything." She turns to walk away, but Theo's voice stops her. "I forgive you, Mom, but I can't forget what you did. I hope you find peace, but I've already found mine." As we watch her walk away, I feel a sense of closure wash over me. The past will always be a part of us, but it doesn't define us. Theo is living proof of that. We may have started as two broken souls, but together we've created something beautiful. A family built on love, trust, and the unshakable bond between a grandmother and her grandson. And as we walk out of the art show, hand in hand, I know that no matter what the future holds, we'll face it together. Always. The scent of freshly baked cookies wafts through the air as I adjust the perfectly staged throw pillows on the couch. It's the little touches that make all the difference in this business. I step back to admire my handiwork, the open house ready to welcome potential buyers. As I turn to check on the refreshments, I freeze. Walking through the front door, bold as brass, are Ethan and Chloe, my ex-husband and his new wife, the woman he left me for. I plaster on my most professional smile, but inside I'm seething. Ethan smirks as he approaches me. Well, if it isn't Zara, still trying to sell houses, I see." Chloe chimes in, her voice dripping with condescension. I'm surprised you're still in this business, Zara. Ethan told me you were never really cut out for it. I bite my tongue, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing me rattled. Ethan, Chloe, what a surprise. I didn't expect to see you here. We're looking for a new place, Ethan says, his arm snaking around Chloe's waist. Thought we'd see what you have to offer. The irony isn't lost on me. Years ago, I supported Ethan as he built his law firm, pouring my heart and soul into our marriage, but nothing I did was ever good enough. He grew distant, critical, always finding fault. Determined to contribute and find my own path, I pursued my real estate license. Ethan belittled my efforts at every turn, telling me I was wasting my time. I should have seen the signs then, but I was too blind, too in love. When I discovered his affair with Chloe, his much younger secretary, I confronted him. He denied it, made me feel like I was going crazy. Gaslighting, they call it. I didn't want to believe it, but the truth was staring me in the face. The divorce blindsided me. Ethan filed, citing irreconcilable differences. What a joke. He moved in with Chloe before the ink was dry on the papers. I fought tooth and nail for a fair settlement, but he did everything in his power to leave me with nothing. I hit rock bottom, but I refused to stay there. I poured myself into my work, determined to succeed on my own terms. And I did. I became a top-selling agent, started my own agency. I made it my mission to help women like me, those going through tough times, find their dream homes and rebuild their lives. And now, here I am, face to face with my past. Ethan and Chloe, looking to downsize. I can't help but feel a twinge of satisfaction at the thought of their financial troubles. I put on my most professional face and guide them through the house, highlighting its features. Ethan makes snide comments under his breath, but I ignore him. Chloe seems distracted, her eyes darting nervously between us. As we wrap up the tour, I can't resist a little dig. I'm sure I can find you something that fits your budget. My business has been thriving, and I have a lot of high-profile clients. I'm sure I can help you out. Ethan's face reddens, and he lashes out. You got lucky, Zara. You're just riding on my coattails. I smile sweetly. Luck has nothing to do with it, Ethan. I worked hard for what I have, and I did it all without you. Chloe shifts uncomfortably, and I can see the cracks in their perfect facade. This is just the beginning. They have no idea what's in store. The memories flood back as I drive home from the open house. Ethan's smug face, Chloe's cutting remarks. They're like a knife twisting in my gut, reminding me of everything I've tried to put behind me. I think back to our marriage, how I supported Ethan through law school, how I believed in him when no one else did. I was there for him, every step of the way, as he built his firm from the ground up. But the more successful he became, the more distant he grew. Nothing I did was ever good enough. He'd come home late, reeking of alcohol and perfume, and I'd pretend not to notice. I'd make his favorite meals, try to engage him in conversation, but he'd just grunt and retreat to his study. I remember the day I decided to get my real estate license. I was tired of feeling like a burden of relying on Ethan for everything. I wanted to contribute, to have something of my own. When I told Ethan my plans, he laughed in my face. You? A real estate agent? Don't be ridiculous, Zara. You don't have what it takes. His words stung, but I refused to let them deter me. I studied hard, passed my exams, and threw myself into my new career. But Ethan never supported me. He'd belittle my efforts, tell me I was wasting my time. And then came the day I found out about Chloe. I stumbled upon a text message on Ethan's phone, a flirty exchange between him and his secretary. My heart shattered into a million pieces. I confronted him that night, my voice shaking with anger and betrayal. How could you do this to me, Ethan? To us? He looked me straight in the eye and lied. I don't know what you're talking about, Zara. You're being paranoid. There's nothing going on between me and Chloe. I wanted to believe him, desperately wanted it to be true. But deep down, I knew. The late nights at the office, the secret phone calls, the way he looked at her when he thought I wasn't watching. I hired a private investigator, and the truth came out. Photos of Ethan and Chloe, caught in the act. I confronted him again, this time with proof, but he just shrugged and said, I guess you weren't enough for me, Zara. I need someone who understands me, who supports my dreams. The divorce was a nightmare. Ethan fought me every step of the way, trying to leave me with nothing. He even had the audacity to claim that I was the one who had been unfaithful. In the end, I walked away with a fair settlement, but I was broken. I had given Ethan the best years of my life, and he had thrown it all away like it meant nothing. I hit rock bottom, but I refused to stay there. I poured myself into my work, determined to prove Ethan wrong. I would show him that I had what it took, that I could succeed without him. And I did. I became a top-selling agent, started my own agency. I made it my mission to help other women like me, those who had been knocked down but refused to stay there. But seeing Ethan and Chloe today, it all comes rushing back. The pain, the betrayal, the anger. I want to scream, to lash out, to make them feel even a fraction of the hurt they caused me. But I won't. I'm better than that. I'm stronger than that. I've built a life for myself, a life that Ethan can never take away from me. As I pull into my driveway, I take a deep breath and let it out slowly. I won't let them get to me. I won't let them win. I'm Zara, and I'm a survivor. And I'll be damned if I let Ethan and Chloe bring me down again. The divorce papers arrive on a Tuesday. I'm sitting at my desk going over some listings when the receptionist buzzes me. "Zara, there's a courier here for you. He says it's urgent." I sign for the envelope, my hands shaking as I tear it open. The words jump out at me. Petition for divorce. Ethan's name, bold and accusing, next to the checked box for irreconcilable differences. I feel like I've been punched in the gut. I knew things were bad, but I never thought he'd go this far. I never thought he'd just give up on us. I try to call him, but he's not answering. I leave message after message, my voice growing more and more desperate. "Ethan, please, can we just talk about this? Can we try to work it out?" But he's gone. I drive by our house, only to find his car missing and a moving van parked out front. The neighbors give me pitying looks as I sit there, engine idling, tears streaming down my face. I find out later that he moved in with Chloe that same day. He didn't even have the decency to wait until the divorce was final. He just couldn't wait to start his new life with her. The divorce is a nightmare. Ethan fights me tooth and nail, trying to leave me with nothing. He hires the best lawyers, the most ruthless ones, and they tear me apart in court. I remember the day of the final hearing, sitting across from him in that sterile courtroom. He wouldn't even look at me, his eyes fixed on Chloe, who sat smugly in the front row. The judge bangs his gavel, and it's over. I walk away with a settlement, but it feels like a hollow victory. I've lost everything that ever mattered to me. I hit rock bottom after that. I can barely get out of bed in the morning, let alone go to work. I start drinking, just to numb the pain. I push away my friends, my family. I don't want their pity, their platitudes. But then, one day I wake up and realize I can't go on like this. I can't let Ethan win. I can't let him destroy me. I pour myself into my work, determined to succeed. I take on every listing, every client. I work harder than I ever have before, fueled by a fire in my belly that won't be quenched, and slowly, painfully, I start to rebuild my life. I find a new apartment, a cozy little place that's all mine. I make new friends, people who don't know my past, who don't look at me with sympathy in their eyes. I focus on my clients, on helping them find their dream homes. I specialize in working with women going through divorces, women who are starting over just like me. I become their champion, their rock. And as the months turn into years, I start to heal. The pain never goes away, not completely, but it becomes bearable. I learn to live with it, to use it as fuel for my ambition. I become a top-selling agent, start my own agency. I surround myself with people who lift me up, who believe in me. I find a new sense of purpose, a new reason to wake up in the morning. But I never forget what Ethan did to me. I never forget the way he tossed me aside like I was nothing. And I vow that one day I'll make him pay. One day I'll show him exactly what he lost when he chose Chloe over me. One day I'll have my revenge. But for now I focus on my work, on my clients, on building the life I deserve. I am Zara, and I will not be broken. Years pass, and I throw myself into my work with a vengeance. I take on every listing, every challenge. I work longer hours than anyone else, determined to prove myself. And it pays off. My sales numbers skyrocket, and I become the top-selling agent in my office. My clients rave about me, recommending me to their friends and family. I specialize in working with women going through tough times, women who are starting over. I become their confidant, their guide. I help them find not just houses, but homes, places where they can heal and rebuild. One of my clients, a single mother named Sarah, hugs me tightly at her closing. I couldn't have done this without you, Zara, she says, tears in her eyes. You gave me the strength to start over, to believe in myself again. Her words stay with me, fueling my determination. I know what it's like to feel lost, to feel like you've hit rock bottom. But I also know that it's possible to climb out, to build a new life from the ashes of the old. I start my own agency, surrounding myself with a team of driven, compassionate women. We become known as the go-to agency for women in transition, for those who need a little extra support and understanding. My business thrives, and I become a well-respected figure in the community. I'm invited to speak at conferences, to share my story and my expertise. I even start a mentorship program for young women interested in real estate. But through it all, I never forget about Ethan. I never forget the way he betrayed me, the way he left me broken and alone. I keep tabs on him, on his law firm. I hear rumors of unethical practices, of clients who feel cheated and misused. I bide my time, waiting for the right moment to strike. I know that revenge is a dish best served cold, and I'm willing to wait as long as it takes. And then one day, opportunity knocks. I'm hosting an open house for a high-end property, a stunning mansion with sweeping views of the city. I'm in the middle of showcasing the gourmet kitchen when I hear a familiar voice behind me. Zara, I thought that was you. I turn around and there they are, Ethan and Chloe, looking older and more haggard than I remember. Ethan's hair is graying at the temples, and Chloe's face is pinched and sour. Ethan, Chloe, what a surprise. I keep my voice cool, my smile polite. I didn't expect to see you here. We're looking for a new place, Chloe says, her eyes darting around the room. Something a little more affordable. I raise an eyebrow. Oh, having some financial trouble, are we? Ethan scowls, his face reddening. That's none of your business, Zara. We're just exploring our options. I smile, a slow, predatory grin. Of course. Well, as you can see, business is booming for me. I've got high-profile clients from all over the city, and my agency is thriving. I'm sure I could find you something suitable. Chloe looks uncomfortable, but Ethan just glares at me. We don't need your help, Zara. We're doing just fine on our own. I shrug, turning back to the kitchen. Suit yourself, but if you change your mind, you know where to find me. As they walk away, I can't help but feel a thrill of satisfaction. Ethan may have broken me once, but I've rebuilt myself, stronger and better than ever. And now, seeing him struggling, seeing the cracks in his perfect facade, I know that my time for revenge is coming. I may have lost the battle all those years ago, but I'm determined to win the war. And I'll do it on my own terms, with my head held high and my dignity intact. Ethan and Chloe may have destroyed my past, but they have no power over my future. I am Zara, and I am unstoppable. A few days after the open house, I'm sitting in my office when my assistant buzzes me. Zara, there's a Chloe here to see you. She says it's urgent. I feel a flicker of surprise, but I keep my voice steady. Send her in. Chloe walks in, looking nervous and tired. She fidgets with her purse, avoiding my gaze. Zara, I need your help. I lean back in my chair, studying her. Oh, and why would I help you, Chloe? You and Ethan made it pretty clear you wanted nothing to do with me. She takes a deep breath, finally meeting my eyes. Ethan and we're having some financial difficulties. His law firm is struggling, and we're barely making ends meet. We need to sell our house, but we don't know where to start. I can't help but feel a twinge of satisfaction at her words. Ethan, the high-powered lawyer, reduced to begging for my help. Oh, how the mighty have fallen. But I keep my face neutral, my voice professional. I see. And you think I'm the right person to help you? Chloe nods, her eyes pleading. You're the best in the business, Zara. Everyone knows that. And I know we haven't always seen eye to eye, but I'm hoping we can put that behind us, for the sake of our shared history. I want to laugh in her face, to tell her exactly where she can stick her shared history. But I hold my tongue, sensing an opportunity. Very well, I say, standing up and smoothing my skirt. I'll take a look at your property and see what I can do, but I make no promises. Chloe nods eagerly, relief flooding her face. Thank you, Zara. You have no idea how much this means to us. Oh, but I think I do, Chloe. I think I know exactly how much it means to you, and I plan to use that to my full advantage. Over the next few weeks, I work with Ethan and Chloe to get their house ready for sale. I bring in my team of stagers and photographers, transforming the outdated property into a sleek, modern showpiece. But even as I work, I can't help but notice the tension between them. Ethan is short-tempered and irritable, snapping at Chloe over the smallest things. And Chloe seems withdrawn and unhappy, her eyes dull and lifeless. One day, as we're going over some paperwork, Chloe pulls me aside. "Zara, can I talk to you for a minute in private?" I nod, leading her into a quiet room. She takes a deep breath, her hands shaking. I don't know how much more of this I can take. Ethan, he's not the man I thought he was. I raise an eyebrow, feigning surprise. "Oh, what do you mean?" Chloe's eyes fill with tears. "He's controlling, manipulative. He's been emotionally abusive for years, but I never wanted to admit it. I thought I could change him, but I was wrong." I feel a flicker of sympathy for her, but I push it down. This is the woman who stole my husband, who ruined my life. I can't afford to feel sorry for her. "I'm sorry to hear that, Chloe," I say, my voice cool and detached. "But what do you expect me to do about it?" She looks at me, her eyes pleading. I don't know. I just needed to tell someone. I feel so trapped, so alone." I nod, my mind racing. This is it. This is the opportunity I've been waiting for, the chance to take Ethan down, once and for all. "I understand," I say, placing a hand on her shoulder. "And I want to help you, Chloe, but you have to be willing to help yourself first. You have to be ready to leave him, to start over." She nods, her face crumpling. I know I do, but I'm scared, Zara. I'm so scared." I squeeze her shoulder, my voice firm and reassuring. "I know you are, but you're not alone, Chloe. I'm here for you, and together we'll make sure Ethan gets exactly what he deserves." Over the next few days, I work closely with Ethan and Chloe, showing them potential properties that fit their budget. I'm professional and courteous, but I can't help but notice the growing tension between them. Ethan is short-tempered and impatient, dismissing every house I show them with a sneer. "Is this the best you can do, Zara? I thought you were supposed to be the top agent in town." I bite back a retort, keeping my smile firmly in place. "I assure you, Ethan, I'm showing you the best properties available in your price range. But if you have something specific in mind, I'm happy to keep looking." Chloe, on the other hand, seems withdrawn and distracted. She barely speaks during our showings, her eyes fixed on the ground. I catch her looking at Ethan with a mixture of fear and resentment, and I know that our conversation from the other day is still weighing heavily on her mind. As we're driving back from yet another unsuccessful showing, Chloe suddenly speaks up from the back seat. "Zara, can we talk? Privately?" I glance at Ethan, who's scowling out the window. "Of course, Chloe. Why don't we grab a coffee?" I drop Ethan off at their hotel, promising to meet him later to go over some paperwork. Then I drive Chloe to a quiet cafe, ordering us both a latte. She takes a deep breath, her hands wrapped tightly around her mug. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said the other day, Zara, about leaving Ethan, starting over." I nod, keeping my face neutral. "And what have you decided?" Chloe's eyes fill with tears. I don't know if I can do it. He's all I've known for so long, and I'm scared of what he might do if I try to leave." I reach across the table, taking her hand in mine. "Chloe, I know it's scary, but you deserve so much better than this. You deserve to be with someone who treats you with love and respect, not someone who tears you down and controls you." She nods, wiping her eyes with a napkin. I know you're right, but I don't even know where to start." I squeeze her hand, my voice firm and reassuring. "Start by talking to a lawyer. Find out what your options are. And in the meantime, document everything. Keep a record of every time Ethan is abusive or controlling. It will help you build a case if you decide to leave." Chloe takes a shaky breath, nodding. Okay, I can do that." I smile at her, feeling a flicker of something that might be hope. "And Chloe, remember, you're not alone. I'm here for you, every step of the way." We finish our coffee and head back to the hotel, where Ethan is waiting impatiently in the lobby. "Where have you been?" he snaps, glaring at Chloe. "I've been waiting for over an hour." I step forward, my voice calm and professional. "I apologize, Ethan. Chloe and I had some business to discuss, but I assure you, everything is under control." He scowls at me, his eyes narrowing. "It better be. I don't have time for any more of your games, Zara." I smile at him, a slow, predatory grin. Oh, Ethan, you have no idea what kind of game I'm playing. As I walk away, I can feel his eyes boring into my back, but I don't look back. I have work to do. Over the next few weeks, I help Chloe gather evidence of Ethan's abuse. She starts keeping a journal, documenting every cruel word, every controlling action. She takes photos of the bruises on her arms, the holes he's punched in the walls, and all the while, I'm building my own case against him. I reach out to some of his former clients, the ones who felt cheated and misused. I gather evidence of his unethical practices, his shady dealings. I know that the time is coming. The time to take Ethan down once and for all, and when that day comes, I'll be ready. Ready to watch him fall, ready to see the look on his face when he realizes that he's finally met his match. In Zara, the woman he once destroyed, the woman who rose from the ashes, stronger and more powerful than ever before, the woman who will be his ultimate downfall. The day of reckoning arrives sooner than I expected. I'm in my office going over some paperwork when my phone rings. It's Chloe, and she's hysterical. Zara, please, you have to help me. Ethan, he found out about the lawyer. He's furious. He's threatening to hurt me, to ruin me. I'm on my feet in an instant, grabbing my keys and my bag. Chloe, listen to me. Get out of there now. Go somewhere safe. I'll take care of Ethan. I can hear her sobbing on the other end of the line. Okay, I'll go to my sister's place. But Zara, please be careful. He's not in his right mind. I hang up the phone, my heart racing. I know what I have to do. I drive to Ethan's office, my mind churning with possibilities. I know I have to be smart about this, have to play my cards just right. I walk into his office without knocking, my head held high. He looks up from his desk, his face twisting with rage. What the hell are you doing here, Zara? I smile at him, a cold, calculating smile. I think you know exactly why I'm here, Ethan. I know what you've been doing to Chloe. I know about the abuse, the manipulation. He stands up, his fists clenched at his sides. You don't know anything, Zara. You're just a bitter, jealous woman who can't let go of the past. I laugh, a harsh, brittle sound. Oh, Ethan, you have no idea what I'm capable of. I've been watching you, gathering evidence. I know about your unethical practices, your shady dealings. I have enough to ruin you, to destroy everything you've ever worked for. His face pales, and I can see the fear in his eyes. You're bluffing. You don't have anything on me. I reach into my bag, pulling out a thick folder. Oh, but I do, Ethan. I have testimonies from your former clients, the ones you cheated and lied to. I have financial records showing your embezzlement, your fraud. I have photos of Chloe's bruises, the ones you gave her when you lost your temper. I toss the folder onto his desk, watching as he scrambles to pick it up. It's over, Ethan. You're finished. And if you ever come near Chloe again, if you ever lay a hand on her, I'll make sure you spend the rest of your life behind bars. He looks up at me, his face contorted with rage and fear. You can't do this, Zara. You can't destroy me. I lean in close, my voice a low, menacing whisper. Watch me. I turn to walk away, but he grabs my arm, his fingers digging into my skin. You'll pay for this, Zara. I'll make sure of it. I wrench my arm away, my eyes blazing with fury. No, Ethan, you're the one who's going to pay. For everything you've done, to me, to Chloe, to all the people you've hurt along the way. You're going to pay, and I'm going to be the one to make sure of it. I walk out of his office, my heart pounding in my chest. I know that this is just the beginning, that there will be a long, difficult road ahead. But I also know that I'm ready for it, ready to fight for what's right, ready to take back the power that Ethan stole from me all those years ago. I get in my car and drive to Chloe's sister's place, my mind racing with possibilities. I know that I have to be there for her, have to help her through this difficult time. But I also know that I have to be strong, have to be the one to lead the charge. Because this is my fight, too. This is my chance to make things right, to get the revenge I've been dreaming of for so long. And I won't rest until Ethan is brought to justice, until he's made to pay for all the pain and suffering he's caused. I am Zara, and I am a force to be reckoned with, and heaven help anyone who tries to stand in my way. The fallout from my confrontation with Ethan is swift and brutal. Within days, the news of his unethical practices and abusive behavior is splashed across every newspaper and news site in the city. His law firm crumbles, clients fleeing in droves. His partners distance themselves, desperate to save their own reputations. and Ethan himself is disgraced, his name becoming synonymous with corruption and deceit. I watch it all unfold with a grim sense of satisfaction, knowing that I played a part in his downfall. But I also know that my work is far from over. Chloe files for divorce, and I help her find a new place to live, a small but cozy apartment in a quiet neighborhood. She's scared and overwhelmed, but I remind her that she's not alone, that she has people who care about her and want to help. We spend long hours talking, sharing our stories and our pain. I tell her about my own divorce, about how Ethan nearly destroyed me, but how I found the strength to rebuild my life. And she tells me about the years of abuse and manipulation, the constant fear and self-doubt. Together, we start to heal, to find a new sense of purpose and hope. Chloe enrolls in therapy, starts taking classes to finish her degree, and I throw myself into my work, determined to make a difference in the lives of other women who have been through similar struggles. Months pass, and life starts to settle into a new normal. Ethan is a distant memory, a cautionary tale of what happens when power and ego go unchecked. But then one day, I receive a phone call that changes everything. It's Ethan, and he's begging for my help. "Zara, please," he says, his voice desperate and broken. I know I have no right to ask, but I don't know where else to turn. I'm losing everything, my career, my reputation, my freedom. I need your help. For a moment, I'm tempted to hang up, to leave him to suffer the consequences of his actions. But then I remember something my therapist once told me about the power of forgiveness, about how holding on to anger and resentment only hurts ourselves in the end. So I take a deep breath, and I make a decision that surprises even me. Okay, Ethan, I'll help you, but not for you, for me, because I need to let go of the past, to move on with my life. We meet at a coffee shop, and I listen as he pours out his heart, telling me about his regrets, his fears, his desperate desire to make things right. And as I listen, I feel something shift inside me, a sense of closure and release. I offer him some advice, some resources for getting help and making amends, and then I stand up to leave, feeling lighter than I have in years. "Thank you, Zara," he says, his eyes filled with tears. "I know I don't deserve your kindness, but I'm grateful for it nonetheless." I nod, a small smile playing at the corners of my mouth. Take care of yourself, Ethan. And remember, it's never too late to start over. As I walk out of the coffee shop, I feel a sense of peace wash over me. I know that I'll never forget the pain and trauma of my past, but I also know that I've found a way to move forward, to build a new life based on strength, resilience, and hope. I think back to the woman I was all those years ago, the one who was broken and lost, who thought she'd never find her way out of the darkness. And I feel a surge of pride and gratitude for how far I've come, for the person I've become. I am Zara, a survivor, a fighter, a woman who has been through hell and back and come out stronger on the other side. And I know that no matter what challenges life throws my way, I have the courage and the determination to face them head on, to keep moving forward, one step at a time. The jingle of the bell above the diner's door announced my arrival. I scanned the room, taking in the faded red vinyl booths and the faint aroma of stale coffee and greasy food. This was exactly the kind of place I'd been looking for, somewhere to blend in, to start over without drawing attention. "Just one?" The voice of the middle-aged waitress snapped me out of my thoughts. "Yes, please." I forced a polite smile. She led me to a booth by the window and handed me a laminated menu. "Take your time, hon." As she walked away, I let out a slow breath, trying to shake off the lingering unease that had followed me since leaving Boston. This was a fresh start, a chance to leave the past behind. I had to make it work. The bell jingled again, and a man strode in, his confident gait instantly commanding attention. He caught my eye and flashed a smile that made my heart skip a beat. There was something disarmingly familiar about him, like a memory I couldn't quite place. "A new face in town, huh?" he remarked casually, sliding into the booth across from me. I tensed, my guard immediately rising. "Yeah, just moved here," I replied, forcing another smile. "What gave it away?" He chuckled softly, his piercing blue eyes studying me intently. "Oh, just a hunch. Small towns don't get many newcomers." "So, what's your name?" he asked, extending a hand. I hesitated for a moment before taking it. "Alice," I said reluctantly. "Alice Grant." "James," he nodded, a grin spreading across his face. "James Rivers." His grip lingered a beat too long, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he knew more about me than he let on. I pulled my hand back, suddenly regretting my decision to come here. "So, Alice," James leaned back, his gaze never wavering, "what brings you to our little slice of paradise?" I swallowed hard, struggling to maintain my composure. "Just needed a change of scenery," I replied, trying to sound casual. "Ah, I see." He nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "Well, let me be the first to welcome you. I have a feeling we're going to get to know each other real well." As he stood and walked away, I couldn't help but wonder what exactly he meant by that, and more importantly, how much did he already know about the life I was so desperate to leave behind. The next few weeks passed in a blur as I settled into my new life in the small town. I found a job at a local bookstore, relishing the peace and quiet it offered. The owner, an elderly woman named Mrs. Henderson, seemed content with my desire to keep to myself. "You've got a real gentle way about you, dear," she remarked one afternoon as we restocked the shelves. "Not like most of the young folks these days." I smiled politely, grateful for her kindness but wary of getting too close. The last thing I needed was to let anyone in, to risk them uncovering the truth about my past. As the days went by, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I stepped out of my apartment, I half expected to see that familiar smirk, those piercing blue eyes studying me from a distance. James Rivers. Our encounter at the diner had left me deeply unsettled, and the fact that I hadn't seen him since only amplified my paranoia. Was he watching me, waiting for the right moment to make his move? Or was I just being paranoid, my past trauma clouding my judgment? One crisp autumn evening, as I was closing up the bookstore, the bell above the door jingled, and there he stood, hands in his pockets, that infuriatingly casual smile plastered across his face. "Well, well, if it isn't the mysterious Miss Grant," he drawled, sauntering toward me. "Working hard, I see." I tensed, my fingers tightening around the stack of books I was holding. "What do you want, James?" He held up his hands in mock surrender. "Easy there. No need to get defensive. I'm just making conversation." "Well, I'm not really in the mood for conversation," I snapped, brushing past him toward the front counter. He followed close behind, his footsteps echoing in the empty store. "You know, you've been awfully hard to track down these past few weeks." I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. "Track down? What are you talking about?" James leaned against the counter, his gaze boring into me. "Oh, come on, Alice. You didn't really think you could just disappear, did you?" My mouth went dry as the realization washed over me. He knew. Somehow he knew about my past, about the life I'd left behind in Boston. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice trembling. "What do you want from me?" A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. "Let's just say I'm a friend of an old acquaintance, and he's been very worried about you, Alice." I felt sick to my stomach, the walls closing in around me. This was it. My past had finally caught up with me, and there was nowhere left to run. My heart raced as James's words sank in. An old acquaintance? There was only one person that could mean Derek. My manipulative, controlling ex-husband, who had made my life a living hell back in Boston. "You're working for Derek, aren't you?" I demanded, clenching my fists to hide the tremors running through my hands. James simply shrugged, that infuriating smirk never leaving his face. The man has deep pockets, and he's willing to pay handsomely to get what he wants. "And what exactly does he want?" I spat, feeling a surge of defiance rise within me. "Well, that should be obvious." James leaned in closer, his voice low and menacing. "He wants you back, Alice, and he's not going to stop until he gets what he wants." A chill ran down my spine at the implication behind his words. Derek had always been possessive, convinced that I belonged to him, that he could control every aspect of my life. The thought of being dragged back into that nightmare was almost too much to bear. "Tell him he can go to hell," I growled, standing my ground. "I'm not going anywhere with him or his lackeys." James's eyes narrowed, and for a moment I saw a flicker of something else behind that casual facade. Anger, maybe even a hint of admiration. "You've got spirit, I'll give you that," he conceded. "But you're playing a dangerous game here, Alice." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a manila envelope, tossing it onto the counter between us. "Derek wanted me to give you these. Said you might need some convincing." With trembling hands, I opened the envelope and felt the blood drain from my face. Inside were a stack of photos, candid shots of me going about my daily life here in this small town, shopping at the grocery store, walking to work, even standing outside my apartment building. Derek had been watching me, tracking my every move. "He's not going to stop, Alice," James said, his voice taking on a softer tone. "He's obsessed with you, and he's got the money and resources to make life very difficult for you if you don't cooperate." I looked up at him, my eyes brimming with tears of frustration and anger. "So, what? I'm just supposed to give in? Let him control me again?" James held my gaze for a long moment, and I could have sworn I saw a flicker of something else in his eyes. Sympathy, maybe? "Look, I'm just the messenger here," he said finally. "But if I were you, I'd think long and hard about what's really important. Because Derek Wallace doesn't take no for an answer." With that, he turned and walked out of the bookstore, leaving me alone with the weight of his words and the sickening realization that my past had finally caught up with me. That night, as I tossed and turned in bed, memories of my life with Derek came flooding back, unbidden. The way he had slowly but surely isolated me from my friends and family. The constant put-downs and criticisms, chipping away at my self-worth until I was a mere shell of my former self. And the rage, that terrifying white-hot rage that would flare up at the slightest provocation, leaving me cowering in fear. It had started out so innocently, like it so often does. Derek was charming and attentive, sweeping me off my feet with grand gestures and lavish gifts. But as the months went by, the cracks began to show, the possessiveness, the jealousy, the need to control every aspect of my life. "You're mine, Alice," he would growl, his grip tightening around my wrist until I winced in pain. "Don't you ever forget that." And I didn't. How could I, when every day was a constant reminder of the power he held over me? The threats, the intimidation tactics, the promises of what he would do if I ever tried to leave. But one night, after a particularly brutal outburst that left me bruised and broken, something inside me finally snapped. I couldn't live like this anymore, constantly walking on eggshells, fearing for my safety and my sanity. So I ran. I packed a bag and slipped out in the middle of the night, leaving behind the luxurious prison Derek had built for me. It wasn't easy. He had eyes and ears everywhere, people loyal to him and the wealth he commanded. But I was determined to start over, to build a life for myself far away from his reach. And for a few blissful weeks, I thought I had succeeded. I found a job, a place to live, and started to piece together the shattered fragments of my life. But then James showed up, shattering the fragile illusion of safety I had constructed. As the sun peeked through my bedroom curtains, I made a decision. I couldn't keep running, not anymore. If Derek wanted a fight, then that's what he would get. I would stand my ground and face him head-on, no matter the cost. With a newfound sense of determination, I threw back the covers and got dressed. There was someone I needed to see, someone who could help me take Derek down once and for all. The crisp autumn air stung my lungs as I made my way through the deserted park, my footsteps crunching on the fallen leaves. This was it, the confrontation I had been both dreading and anticipating. I had left James a terse message, demanding to meet on my terms. Surprisingly, he had agreed without argument. As I rounded the corner, I saw him sitting on a bench, his hands stuffed into the pockets of his jacket. He looked up as I approached, that infuriatingly casual smirk playing on his lips. "You wanted to see me?" he asked, his voice carrying a hint of amusement. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "I want you to leave me alone, James, and I want you to tell Derek that I'm not going back. Not now. Not ever." He raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed by my bravado. "Is that so? And what makes you think either of us is going to listen to your demands?" "Because I have information," I blurted out, my heart pounding in my chest, information that could ruin Derek if it ever got out. That seemed to catch his attention. He sat up straighter, his gaze sharpening. "I'm listening." I took a step closer, my voice low and urgent. "Derek has been embezzling money from his company for years, funneling it into offshore accounts, using it to fund his lavish lifestyle and keep his mistresses happy." James's eyes narrowed, but he didn't interrupt. "I have proof," I continued, my confidence growing. "Bank statements, wire transfers, the whole 9 yards. If that information ever got out, it would destroy him." For a long moment, James was silent, considering my words. Then, To my surprise, he let out a low chuckle. "You've got balls, I'll give you that," he said, shaking his head. "But you really think Derek is going to let a little thing like embezzlement stop him? The man is obsessed with you, Alice. He'll stop at nothing to get you back." I clenched my jaw, refusing to back down. "Then I'll go public with the information. Let the world see the kind of man he really is." James leaned back, studying me with a newfound curiosity. "You know, when I first took this job, I thought you were just another spoiled rich girl running away from her problems. But now—" He trailed off, his gaze lingering on me. "Now I'm starting to think there might be more to you than meets the eye." Before I could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps made us both turn. My heart stopped as a figure emerged from the tree line, a figure I knew all too well. "Well, well," Derek drawled, his eyes cold and calculating as they fell on me. "Isn't this a cozy little reunion?" My heart pounded in my chest as Derek stepped out from the shadows, his expensive suit crisp and immaculate as always. Despite the chill in the air, I felt beads of sweat forming on my brow. "What are you doing here?" I demanded, my voice shakier than I would have liked. Derek's lips curled into a condescending smile. "Is that any way to greet your husband, Alice? After all the trouble I've gone through to find you?" I flinched at the word husband, a bitter reminder of the chains I had so desperately tried to break free from. "We're not married anymore, Derek," I spat. "Not after what you did." His eyes flashed with anger, and for a moment I caught a glimpse of the monster that lurked beneath that polished exterior. "You're mine, Alice," he growled, taking a step closer. "You always have been, and you always will be. This little game of hide-and-seek ends now." I instinctively backed away, only to feel James tense beside me. To my surprise, he had risen to his feet, positioning himself between Derek and me. "I think the lady has made her position pretty clear," James said, his voice low and even. "She doesn't want anything to do with you." Derek's gaze flickered to James, and a cruel smile spread across his face. "Ah, yes, the hired help. Tell me, how much is my dear wife paying you to play the knight in shining armor?" James didn't rise to the bait. "This has nothing to do with money. Alice is her own person, and she has the right to make her own choices." For a long moment, the two men stared each other down, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Then, to my astonishment, Derek threw back his head and laughed, a cold, mirthless sound that sent shivers down my spine. "You really have no idea who you're dealing with, do you?" he sneered, turning his icy glare back to me. "Alice belongs to me, and I'll do whatever it takes to get her back." With a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, I realized what he was implying. Derek always had an ace up his sleeve, some leverage or damaging secret he could use to bend people to his will. "What is it this time, Derek?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "What twisted game are you playing?" His smile was chilling. "Let's just say I have a little something that could make your life very, very difficult if you don't cooperate." He paused, letting the threat hang in the air. "But we can discuss that later. For now, I think it's time we went home, don't you?" I opened my mouth to protest, but the words died on my lips as Derek's hand moved ever so slightly, and I caught a glimpse of something metallic peeking out from beneath his jacket. A gun. The world seemed to slow to a crawl as Derek's hand moved towards the gun tucked into his waistband. My heart hammered in my chest, every instinct screaming at me to run, to get as far away from this man as possible. But before either of us could react, James was on him, grabbing Derek's wrist and twisting it behind his back with a sickening crack. The gun clattered to the ground as Derek let out a howl of pain. "You son of a bitch," he spat, struggling against James's iron grip. "Do you have any idea who you're dealing with?" "I'm dealing with a coward who threatens women with guns," James growled, his face contorted with fury. "A pathetic excuse for a man." With his free hand, Derek reached into his jacket, no doubt going for another weapon. But James was faster, delivering a vicious blow to Derek's midsection that doubled him over, wheezing. "Alice, run," James barked, his attention momentarily diverted. It was all the opening Derek needed. With a feral snarl, he wrenched himself free and lunged at James, the two men grappling viciously on the ground. I stood frozen, paralyzed by the brutal scene unfolding before me. "Go!" James shouted again, his voice strained as he fought to keep Derek at bay. "Get out of here!" Snapping out of my daze, I turned and ran, my feet pounding against the pavement as I fled the park. Branches scratched at my face and my lungs burned, but I didn't dare slow down, not until I had put as much distance between myself and Derek as possible. Finally, gasping for breath, I stumbled into the parking lot of my apartment complex, collapsing against the rough brick wall. My mind raced, replaying the events of the night over and over again. James had saved me. The man I had initially mistrusted, the one I thought was just another pawn in Derek's twisted game, had put himself in harm's way to protect me. And now, who knew what Derek was capable of doing to him? The thought made my stomach churn, and I knew I couldn't just leave him to face Derek's wrath alone. Not after what he had done for me. Steeling my resolve, I pushed off from the wall and made my way back towards the park, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. As I drew closer, I could hear the sounds of the struggle, grunts of exertion, the dull thud of fists connecting with flesh. And then, silence. I rounded the corner, and the sight that greeted me made my blood run cold. James lay motionless on the ground, a trickle of blood running from a gash above his eye, and standing over him, chest heaving, was Derek, his face twisted into a mask of pure rage. "Well, well," he sneered, turning his icy glare towards me. "Look who decided to come back." My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at Derek, his face twisted into a sneer of triumph. James lay motionless on the ground behind him, and a wave of guilt and fear washed over me. This was all my fault. If I had just gone back with Derek like he demanded, none of this would have happened. "You just couldn't leave well enough alone, could you?" Derek spat, taking a menacing step towards me. "Had to go and play the hero. Try to take me down." I opened my mouth to respond, but the words caught in my throat. What could I possibly say to reason with this man, this monster who had haunted my every waking moment for so long? "I'm done playing games, Alice," he growled, his voice low and dangerous. "You're coming home with me, one way or another." A flicker of movement in my peripheral vision caught my eye, and I turned to see James stirring feebly on the ground. Relief flooded through me. He was alive, at least for now. "Don't you dare touch her," James rasped, his words slurred as he struggled to push himself up. Derek let out a derisive snort. "Or what? You'll bleed on me some more." He turned back to me, a cruel smile twisting his lips. "You see what happens when you defy me, Alice? When you try to run?" My mind raced, desperately searching for a way out of this nightmare. I couldn't go back with him, not after everything he had put me through. But I couldn't bear the thought of anyone else getting hurt because of me either. That's when I remembered the envelope, the one containing all the damning evidence of Derek's criminal activities. With trembling hands, I reached into my pocket and pulled it out, holding it up for him to see. "You want me, Derek?" I said, my voice wavering slightly. "Fine, but first you have to destroy this." His eyes narrowed as he registered what I was holding. "Where did you get that?" "Does it matter?" I countered, trying to project a confidence I didn't feel. "All that matters is what's inside, enough to bury you for good." For a long moment Derek was silent, weighing his options. Then slowly he extended his hand. "Give it to me." I shook my head defiantly. "Not a chance. You destroy it first, then I'll go with you. No tricks." A muscle twitched in Derek's jaw, but he seemed to realize he had no other choice. With exaggerated care, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a sleek silver lighter. Our eyes locked as he flicked it open, the tiny flame dancing in the evening breeze. "After you," I said, nodding towards the envelope. Derek's lips curled into a sneer, but he did as I asked, touching the flame to the corner of the envelope. The papers inside caught fire instantly, and he dropped it to the ground, watching impassively as the evidence went up in smoke. "There," he said, grinding the ashes beneath his heel. "Now come along, like a good girl." I felt sick to my stomach, but I had no other choice. Squaring my shoulders, I started to move towards him, my heart heavy with dread. That's when I heard it, a faint ringing sound coming from the bushes nearby. Derek froze, his brow furrowing in confusion. Then, to my astonishment, a figure emerged from the shadows, holding up a sleek black phone. "You really should be more careful with your secrets, Derek," a familiar voice rang out. "You never know who might be listening." "Mia?"